So here we go. Here, day one of the Future of EdTech conference. Thank you so much for joining us today. As you may have heard before that little video there, very excited to welcome Caroline Wright, Director General at BESA, to deliver our welcome address this morning. So with no further ado, welcome to Caroline Wright. I think I've done a big enough sort of intro for you there, Caroline. I could talk about other things you might find on your social profiles, but I think I've given you and BESA a big leg up there. So welcome, Caroline. Really great to have you join us, and really looking forward to hearing your welcome address. Thank you so much, Caroline. How are you doing?
I'm very well, thank you. And thank you so much. You've pretty much run through everything that BESA does. So I've been listening to you. I couldn't do it better myself. So thank you so much.
Bless you,
it's lovely
you.
to be here.
Did you want to share your screen this morning?
Yes, I will, if that's okay.
Absolutely, yeah. Brilliant stuff.
Hold on. Right. Okay. Oops. I'm trying to... Oops. Bear with me.
No, absolutely. And while Caroline's getting that sorted, what we're going to do to help as well, we're going to pop the addresses for LendEd and LearnEd for the website where you can find information across the bottom. So and we'll share it in the chat as well. So if you aren't aware where to find those, then you can find those through looking at the tickers. It'll go across the bottom just a few moments. We'll also pop it into the chat as well. And your presentation is now up on the screen in front of us, Caroline. So whenever it is indeed. So whenever you're good, whenever you're ready, you are good to go.
Lovely. Oh, well, thank you very much. And yeah, do tell me if it stops showing. So I'll just carry on. But yeah, thank you ever so much, particularly to Mark and Ronan for inviting me here and organising this fantastic event, because I think listening to Mark speaking, what I'm really looking forward to is hearing the different perspectives from around the world. You know, I'm from the UK's perspective, I'm really looking forward to hearing from Buki, Youssef and Al Kingsley, but also hearing from Dr. Neelam Palmer, people I've heard speak before, but are so expert and insightful. And then also there are speakers I haven't heard before, and I'm really excited to learn from their new perspectives. So I think it's going to be a brilliant couple of days, and I'm really looking forward to it. So thanks ever so much. But first of all, a little bit about BESA and me and why on earth I'm here speaking. As Mark said, BESA is the industry body for the British education suppliers. And what I do just want to point out is when we set ourselves up, which is a long time ago now, but increasingly throughout the years, we've been really keen to make sure that schools and educators who obviously have a challenge differentiating between one vendor or supplier to another, is we have a kite mark. You can see a little tick there, which is a code of practice that all of our members agree to follow. It covers quality and standards, integrity, safeguarding, transparency and openness. And so it just means that when a school is thinking about who they want to partner with, who they want to work with, they know that we've taken care of some of those quality assurance. And because of that, we work with hundreds and hundreds of British companies, many of them, the majority working in EdTech, and that actually gives us a perspective, and we carry out research, particularly on the UK market, which helps inform some of the trends and issues that we'll be talking about over the next couple of days. So I hope that gives a little bit of background about BESA. But the title of this conference and what we're going to be talking about for me is so exciting. You know, talk about the future of EdTech. Well, what is it? Actually, I'd flip it on the head. I think EdTech is the future. You know, we have had in the UK, from our perspective, we have had nearly 100 years of EdTech. The first educational broadcast by the BBC on radio was in 1921. So that's a long time ago. We've obviously seen that progress into different kinds of technologies. In the last few decades in the UK, we have seen really quite serious investment in both technology infrastructure in schools and also in the content that's used in classrooms. And that led to, just pre-pandemic, from our research showing that in about 50%, in about half of all lessons, where there was use of digital technology and EdTech in the classroom. But then when you roll that forward to where we are now, and you just think of the kind of confluence of issues that have come together and sort of mushroomed that's just made EdTech grow exponentially. And I think we are in a situation now where it's really, really crucial to take a look at what do we want from the future of EdTech? How can we learn from what we've experienced over the last 18 months to really move forward in a strategic and constructive way that benefits pupils and students, but also those working in education, the educators, you who are doing it. Kind of how can you make it to make your working lives simpler, more streamlined, but also provide you with the time to be able to benefit from what you do best, which is teaching and school leadership. So I think I'll touch on each of these issues, but you can see them there. I think there's sort of environmental, budgetary, health and safety, sort of access and inclusion issues. So just taking each of those individually, and actually, I'd be interested in hearing if the news in the United Kingdom at the moment is all about the climate change conference in Glasgow. And I'm not sure if that's just because it's in the UK or if it's being covered by the news around the world. But that's certainly, it's really raised the profile of environmental awareness in the United Kingdom over the last couple of years as we've been preparing for the conference. And I think that's just building on a general increase in environmental awareness that's been going on for a number of years. You know, there's an accelerating desire to limit environmental damage, saving paper, saving energy on travel and carbon emissions. And actually EdTech is a real tool that can be used alongside tech in other sectors to help save resources and help address some of those issues. So I think we've got that as an issue that's really coming into play particularly, and I expect more so in the future. Then we have budgetary considerations. Even before COVID, budgets across education and school budgets in many countries were really under pressure from competing priorities. And particularly in countries that already had an existing infrastructure for technology, we were seeing governments and systems really looking to how they could use technology to drive efficiencies and savings in classrooms and schools, whether that's through sort of school management services, online subscriptions and other areas of tech usage. And actually in the United Kingdom, our government published an EdTech strategy in 2019, which really focused on obviously improving teaching and learning outcomes. But some of the secondary considerations were really about reducing teacher workload and also increasing efficiencies in school management and budgets. So that's a real focus. And just a little bit, like I say, I'm speaking from a British context with research from the UK. But if you look at some of those factors which just show the budget challenge, which will be pushing to look for savings and where could they come from by using technology more effectively and efficiently. Typical school budget for primary, so children up to the age of 11, about £1 million per school, just under 5 million for a secondary. So that's kind of children 12 all the way through to potentially 16 or 18, which sounds fine. However, when you look at what's actually spent on the school management systems and the educational resources, not just technology, all of them, typically 80% of a school budget is spent on staff costs, and never advocating that you'd want to change that, because obviously you need outstanding school leaders and teachers to actually make anything happen. But then there's kind of the whole sort of 15% plus on running costs, energy, pensions, you know, repairing the boiler when it breaks, insurance, licenses, photocopying and so on, which just leaves typically in a UK school less than 5% of the entire school budget being spent on all of the stuff that the kids use to learn. So that's kind of textbooks all the way through to EdTech. And when you actually look at that, that doesn't leave a very, very large amount. So schools are increasingly looking on how they can get the best value for their money and how they'll be able to make sure that children have as much access to those crucial sort of content and learning resources. And very often we're seeing, as the next slide shows, schools looking at sort of EdTech software, content assessment, also increasing their ICT hardware, and just investing in technology as a means of helping support teaching and learning in their schools. This slide here outlines budget expectations, where we surveyed more than 1,200 school leaders in the UK earlier this year about what their spending priorities would be. So it's not about how much they'll spend, but it's what they would prioritise in terms of using their school budgets in the future. So you can see the top three are very much based on EdTech and continued investment. So not just all of the significant investment we've seen throughout the last year in tech infrastructure and delivery, but actually seeing it as part of the future, part of their ongoing management. And I would expect very strongly that that fourth point there, training, would be in, quite rightly, teaching and helping teachers understand how they can use those tools effectively. So that's just a little bit about the budget. But then one of the other kind of factors I said lead to that confluence that I think we're talking about when we come to about the future of EdTech, health and safety. Obviously, I like to describe educational technology as the fourth emergency service during COVID. Obviously, we had our health system, ambulances, fire service, police. Actually, technology, and particularly EdTech, came to the rescue in the sense of making sure that we could keep our communities safe and separate during the early days of COVID, whilst nations are being vaccinated, and also ensure that children could still be connected and receive learning and teaching from their schools. So for me, that's kind of health and safety considerations. We imagine what would have happened if we didn't have technology over the last 2 years, and the challenges we'd be facing as societies if we couldn't have been able to access education for our children during that time. So health and safety, and I think moving forwards, clearly the world is going to be a long time before the world is vaccinated. We will have continued periods of self-isolation where students may need to be in and out of school. Having technology and having that enhanced knowledge and understanding of how to use it will really, really help in the future. Next issue I wanted to touch on was the issue of accessibility and inclusion. I think apart from the obvious barrier that we'll come on to, which is you need to have access and be connected in the first place, which has been a challenge in many places, once connected, I think EdTech really does play a role in our future and some of the benefits that can come from in terms of accessibility and inclusion. I put this slide in here because I was really struck. Within BESA, we have a group, a networking group, our BESA Women's Networking Group. And one of the early comments from one of the women on the call was, everybody's the same size on an online call. And I think it's that ability to give a voice to groups of people who may have not felt that they had access to the table previously. It gives everybody a voice in those conversations, which I think can only be good on improving diversity and representation. I think there's also a really key point that actually technology enables access to excellence. You know, it can be an inspiration for everybody, not just those who can perhaps afford to pay to hear inspiring speakers or have the very best content and resources, or have networks that could put them in touch with people. It means things like this. Today, we can hear from really inspirational speakers. You can access TED Talks and hear from the very, very best in field. Students can have role models to look up to that they can watch and can access in the same way that couldn't have happened previously. So I think that's a real potential. And then I think there's just that point, which is slightly broader than educational technology, but it just plays such a massive role right from the start. Kind of, it allows access for unrepresentative groups, and particularly women, access to lifelong learning, career enhancement, working from home. It kind of knocks that argument for presenteeism out of the park in the terms of many people, particularly, many people have issues where they may not be able to be in an office from 9 to 5, but this allows them to participate in education, participate in the workplace on an equal footing. So I think that's kind of a real key that's leading to one of the drivers on looking at the future use of educational technology. But like I said, it's not without the challenges and considerations that we need to think about. I've just put 3, there are more obviously, but I've just put 3 that I think it will be interesting to hear about and talk about over the next couple of days. That issue of digital safeguarding and rights. I do think in the future of EdTech, we really need to have a more detailed and a nuanced conversation about digital rights, ethics in EdTech and AI, and the use of data. You know, I'm really struck that what might be welcomed and accepted in one society, culture or economy might be seen or considered really uncomfortable or inappropriate in another. And each jurisdiction or each nation needs to have its own conversation and broader debate about what's right in their own contexts. In the UK, in September this year, a new age-appropriate design code came into effect for websites and app designers, so that companies are expected to take the best interests of child users into account. But, you know, the best interests of child users in a British context might be considered different in a different context. So we need to just have that more sophisticated and, I think, detailed discussion about what we feel comfortable with, and then ensuring that we respect that and we listen to the rules and regulations of other societies. I had a very early start this morning. I was actually on a 5 o'clock call with a teacher in the UAE, and it's a fantastic conversation because he's going to be taking part as a judge in the Guest Dubai Dragon's Den competition we're running sort of in 2 weeks' time in Dubai, which is really about giving advice and feedback on companies on the suitability of their educational products that might be international products or British products for the Middle East market. And I think that kind of that cultural understanding and knowledge and respect is really, really important. So that's one issue that I think we need to look at moving forward. Access, digital access. Clearly, even the wealthiest of nations have a digital divide in the terms of the access that young people and some students from disadvantaged backgrounds have to technology. Clearly that needs to be resolved, and clearly there is a role for governments and policymakers in that to help bridge the gap in some of that. But I think what I have pointed out there, it's a very long link, but I put it up there so that you can take a look at it. There is an incredibly helpful report that was carried out by Professor Tim Unwin on behalf of UNESCO, looking at educational for the most marginalised post-COVID and how digital technologies can be used in a range of different contexts. So I'd really recommend that's a useful tool for governments, policy makers and educators moving forward. And the final point I've got on there is about ongoing investment and training. We can't have, technology does not just exist in a vacuum, a point in time where, you know, we've bought some stuff, it's being used. It needs to be maintained. There needs to be ongoing investment. There needs to be ongoing training for teachers and pupils too. So actually we have to factor EdTech in as a vital essential in the ongoing administration and running of our education system. So that's a really important factor. It's not just a tick box that governments can think that they've just invested once, or a school's bought some stuff once. It's really thinking through. I mean, I know I'm preaching to the converted here and you all understand that, but I just think for those decision makers out there who might not be as embedded in the use of technology in schools as this group is, I think it's something that we really need to be pushing and making clear. Okay, so that was sort of the context, I think, to why it's such an important point, and then looking at sort of the way forward. So what is the way forward? Is it sort of a grassroots up or centralized top down approach to kind of get things right in the future? I think ultimately it's always going to be a bit of both. I see kind of governments, we need to be enabled. They're enablers and potentially regulators. I think they have a duty to protect their citizens with sort of minimum standards and access. And they also need to enable that environment for technology to be used in schools. But I think really importantly, it's we should be respecting educators as experts, both in pedagogy and also in understanding the local importance of different approaches and different attitudes in delivering teaching and learning within local communities. I think that, for me, is the single most important point. And I think only harnessing both those, enabling governments and educator experts, I think if you get that sort of will build a resilient or innovative kind of approach to education that means we can move forward and reflect the needs of the users, the pupils and students. But I think kind of the final point really is, and I think it brings together everything we're trying to do here, it's to be successful. I think we need to continue to collaborate and communicate. So events like today, where we have innovators, commercial innovators, we have educators. We're coming together and sharing ideas and thoughts, and I just think that's all for the better, and we need to make sure that we carry on these kinds of dialogues and learn from each other. I've just shared some insights from the UK's perspective, but I'm really keen to hear from what's working well, best practice in other nation contexts, so that we can take that back and we can all sort of share and build on our shared experience. So thank you so much. I've really enjoyed talking to you, and I'm really looking forward to speaking to and seeing the rest of the event. So there are my contact details, and I hope that was helpful.
Fantastic stuff. Thank you very much indeed, Caroline. I popped the details for LendEd and LearnEd across the bottom. Then what I didn't do, which I said I would do, is put it into the chat with on YouTube, but I will do that. Thank you for sharing those insights. And it is such an exciting time, isn't it? Well, whilst we've got a moment before we move on to our next speaker, Caroline, I wonder if I could ask you a quick question in a Q&A sort of style.
Go for it.
I'm mindful of the conversation that I was privileged to be able to hear from those students at the BESA AGM recently. And they were talking about their experiences during lockdown, and obviously a huge upskill in use of technology. And the children, you know, were really clear on how they recognised how much the sort of learning activities developed from sort of lockdown 1 into lockdown 2 and so forth and so on. But in your experience in chatting with vendors and those in schools as well, how are schools sort of maintain that momentum? Because one of the issues, you know, with EdTech adoption, for years and years, I've always been thinking, you know, are we nearly there yet? You know, that thing that our children say in the car when you're traveling 10 miles. And are we nearly there yet when it comes to EdTech adoption, do you think?
Well, I think we need to take a break at the next services, if we're following that analogy, because I know, as Mark saw, it was a really inspiring group of students and their teacher, and they were so pragmatic and resilient and resourceful. But for the students, they had their challenges that they were working through. But I think we were all really struck by the teacher and how emotionally drained it was personally, kind of delivering and doing your absolute best for your students within the challenges of the last year. So I think schools are coping and they are delivering, and they'll continue to do so because they're an amazing kind of collection of individuals that makes a really, really incredible, like I say, support service for students. However, that comes at a cost, and it's tiring. And I think what's really key is it's different in different parts of the world, but until we reach a situation where COVID is absolutely under control and being managed in a way that there aren't the high case rates that are currently there, we need to make sure we're providing, not just with finances and budgets to do it, we need to be providing our schools and our teachers with that sort of emotional support and mental well-being tools, because it is like we see with our health workers, that it's been draining on them. I think we are facing a challenging period where our teachers need some space and time to also recharge for themselves as well. So yeah, maybe a stop and some strong coffee at the next services, I'd say.
Mine's a skinny latte, Caroline. Thank you for sharing your insights. I always enjoy hearing what you have to share, and I always come away having learned things as well. So thank you so much for giving up some time this morning, and look forward to hearing your thoughts on the rest of the day as you're able to dip in and enjoy the other sessions. Thank you so much for giving up some time to join us today. Massively appreciate it. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Okay, next up on the Future of EdTech conference, day 1, we have the one and only Kobe Reynolds. Now, it would appear that Kobe's got a bit of a fan club. If I just scroll back through on the messages here, his fan club were leaving some messages here. We've got Ryan Krakowski, saying the Hong Kong chapter of the Kobe Reynolds fan club. Welcome, Kobe. How are you doing today?
Thanks, Mark. Thanks for having me on today. Nice to join you. It's evening where I am, mate. We're down in Oz, and it's about 8:25 p.m. So good morning to you and good evening from here.
Absolutely, and it's lovely to see you. It's been too long since we had a chance to have a conversation. I'm really looking forward to your presentation. I did see one of your slides in the background when you were getting things ready before you came on. Said dancing with AI, not to be confused with Al Kingsley. There's no dancing with Al.
No dancing with Al. No, unless he wants to. I mean, we can make that happen.
Well, I'm sure with VR these days and platforms like Engage, we could always make it happen, couldn't we?
For sure.
So really excited to hear from you, Kobe. And what I'll do is I will drop out of the studio now. I'll share your screen and the floor is over to you. Thank you again for joining us, Kobe. Cheers.
Perfect. Thanks, Mark. Okay. All right, guys. First of all, just a little disclaimer here. Obviously, I'm no expert in AI and I'm no expert in machine learning, but the topic of my conversation today is preparing our students for the future of technology and the future of society in which they live. And a part of that is already what is around now, and that's AI and machine learning. So it's a little bit of a guide today of how to get our students ready for today, which AI and machine learning already runs a lot of aspects of their lives, and for the future as well. So when you think of AI and machine learning, you might get thrown back into something like this. You've got Will Smith in iRobot talking about self-aware devices, where robots are starting to think for themselves and have the emotional intelligence of a human. Or your mind might slip back to a little bit of this, and the Terminator and Skynet. And these are some of the things that come straight away when you start to think about AI and technology, if you don't really understand the topic. So before we get too started, what I'll do is I'll unpack the topic a little bit. So if we're talking more about the future of EdTech, I like to use this cone of plausibility. We look at aspects of where we are at the present and what's the plausible and possible future. So we can see here in a few different areas here that we can look at the preferable future down the bottom in yellow. This is kind of where we want to be. It's where we can, somewhat plan effective strategy around to get to. You've also got the probable future, which is really what's going to happen. It's not something that you can plan. It could be something a little bit different as well. And then you've got these other things like wildcards. And we've been thrown a big wildcard in the past 12 to 18 months around, obviously, the global pandemic. So these are things that are possible, okay? And if we talk about Skynet, we hope that sits just a little bit outside that possible realm of kind of plausibility as well. So if we're talking about AI, I just want to give a little brief definition for AI for those people who may still be thinking it's a little bit about the Terminator. So AI is just a basic code that allows to run repeatedly to complete really basic tasks, but really fast. So it's something that uses a lot of data and a lot of machine learning, which I'll get to in a moment. And it does really fast things that us as humans couldn't really do in a time frame. So machine learning also is the data that AI uses. So AI can't really work without machine learning. It's the data set that is collected or produced or given to by the people or particular technology. And it allows the majority of the AI technology to actually work and function. So some practical elements of this, things like Spotify, for example, where you get curated lists on what you've been listening to and things like that, and your daily mixes. And as you can see here, for those any dads out there, I've got Coco Melon on my daily mix #1. Shout out to the Coco Melon fans out there. You can also look at other aspects of this where it starts to trend things on Twitter, for example. So we're able to have aspects of curated content that's personalized for us or personalized for our location or what's trending globally. Also, more recently, there's been AI programs that are starting to curate articles. And whether these curated articles are real or not, people read into these things, and it's starting to really impact the way that we learn and the way that we find our news. Another key example that really impacts our students these days is Grammarly. Grammarly is an AI program that uses machine learning that is able to analyze the writing that you have and to provide you more feedback on the way that you're able to write. And it learns how you write and it's able to provide you more information as we keep moving and moving. So Grammarly is another one. A great way to conceptualize AI is a framework and an organization for AI for K-12. The AI for K-12 group are an organization that conceptualizes the AI into 5 key ideas. We look at perception, representation and reasoning, learning, natural interaction, and one of the biggest things and one of the focus for my presentation today is the societal impact that it has. So as our students now in online learning or they're at home and they're getting younger and younger as they access this type of content, they're surrounded everywhere by these type of AI programs and bots. So how do we teach our kids? These are one of the big important things. How do we teach our kids of what this kind of looks like? And how do we prepare them for this future, for this probable future, or for these wildcard scenario futures? So a couple of things today. I'm going to keep it very simple at more of a primary based level. So a lot of my specialization is around primary level. So I'm going to start very entry level on some resources today that you guys can get started actually teaching your students about AI and machine learning. One of the first ones is a Hello Ruby series. And if you haven't checked these out, these are an amazing resource for you to have. This particular one on the right, Adventures in Coding, is a book, but I'm just going to bounce into a little bit and show you what some of these resources actually are. So this here is Love Letters for Computers. And it's a great curated content by Linda Lucas, who is the curator of this and author. And if you come down a little bit, you can see lots of elements of technology here. The one I really like and I'm going to talk about today is the machine learning and AI section. And it gives you very easy, basic ways to conceptualize this understanding of what AI is for your students. It gives you a few different things to watch, a few different other elements, the things that we're going to explore today. And also gives you a really cool PDF of a range of different things that you can work on with your students around machine learning and AI. So here's an example here. So an AI machine learning lesson reflection. You can go through and there's a range of different PDFs that you can follow and work with your students as well. So this is a really good resource, and I've used a number of different resources from this Hello Ruby series, but I found this one to be one of the best ones that I've found. So that's one example. Another example, and a lot of what Google are trying to do more recently is to provide this data they're all collecting more on a freely available source. So they've started to create a number of different AI experiments. So this link, and I'll put these links up available later on the socials and things like that. And Mark, you might be able to put some of these into the chat as well. These are experiments with Google, and they're a range of AI machine learning programs that are really great that you can share with your kids. A number of different ones that I've used specifically is this one here called Teachable Machine. We're going to have a look at that. I won't come into that just now. Another really cool one is Google Quick Draw. And if you haven't seen this, it's a really great way to introduce the concept of AI and machine learning and data sets. So this is basically it's an AI program that gives you a quick topic or an image or something like Pictionary, and you have to draw it. And basically what it does is it gives you 20 seconds to draw this. Now, I'm going to try and draw a skyline with my mouse in under 20 seconds. Let's have a go and have a listen as well.
I see skyscraper.
Some mountains.
Oh, I know. It's skyline.
It already got me. And it keeps going and going and going. So what it's actually doing is it's picking up characteristics of what I'm drawing based on its machine learning data and then interpreting what actual object that is. And this goes on and does about 2 out of 6. And I'm not going to bore you too much with that. So you can have a play around with that one yourself. And it's really good to be able to talk about biased data and biased information that the machine learning is actually picking up as well. So that's a really great resource and really fun for the kids to do as well. There's another cool one down here for those Queen fans, is how Freddie are you? A Freddie meter. I'm not going to do that live on camera. I'm not that silly. But it basically goes on, and it's an AI program that analyzes your voice and gives you a rating at the end after singing excerpts of Queen songs, and to see how Freddie you are. So that's a really cool one and a lot of fun as well. This one here is an AI program as well, which is called Semiconductor, that uses a lot of machine learning data of body movements and objects to conduct an orchestra. So you come in, you basically train your AI program. I'm not sure if this might work because I'm sharing my screen as well. Let me try. So you can stand up a little bit here and you get your face in here. I normally need to be standing a little bit further away. And then I'm able to allowed to conduct the orchestra. So you can see all these dots and lines here. It's trying to pick up my body movements. Okay. But I think I'm a little bit too close for the thing today, but that's another very cool one that you can have a go at as well. So if we're looking at a lot of different needs, there's a number of different ones, but they're just some that I really like using. The one that I really want to deep dive into today is one that I've utilized before, and it's something a little bit new that's out of the MIT Media Lab. So for those of you who've used Scratch before, this is a version of Scratch from the MIT Media Lab that allows AI programs to run effectively in this Scratch. So again, I'll put all the links into it's something a little bit later so you guys can access these. So basically, the interface already, you can see that it looks like Scratch. A few differences, and a main differences is you're missing, obviously, your sign-in and a few things like that. And it's actually hosted on GitHub. So it's actually not quite what you would expect when you come into Scratch. So if I come into here now, you'll notice it all looks very much the same. But the main difference is you come down to the extensions at the bottom. You'll start to notice there are a few different extensions to actually really enhance the learning within Scratch. It's got a number of AI built-in programs now. You've got this body sensing one, you've now got a face sensing one, hand sensing, and teachable machine. So teachable machine was one that I came up a little bit before, and I'm going to actually jump back to that in a moment, because what we're going to do today very quickly, and I'm hoping this will work on the live stream, is I'm going to train a small model, and then I'm going to be able to put that into Scratch and teach it how to do something and control something in Scratch, which for kids is really awesome because it's able to then use data, use machine learning data and understand how computers collect information, and then put that into an AI program and actually let it run. So one of the things we'll do is I'm going to come back here and open up Teachable Machine. So Teachable Machine is Google ran as well, so you can access this free. It's a simple login because it will need to save the model for you. As I said, I'm not very technology advanced, but it does export in a range of different formats to a range of different things. I'm sure those people who are interested can have a check out that. But the thing that we need to know today is it is able to host on the cloud and go into Scratch for us. So as I said, Teachable Machine is a program that you can teach. You can put in different data sets and things on image projects, so image recognition and things like that we would see from basic AI programs, and audio. This is a little bit temperamental sometimes. It's a little bit interesting. This pose one, you might recognize that one just from before when I was talking a little bit about the semiconductor. That's a really cool one for kids to put their hands and bodies up and do angles with shapes and things like that, and getting kids moving. But the one I'm going to stick to today very briefly, just for time constraints, is this one here called Image Project. I'm going to choose a standard project. And when you come in, you have two classes. So I'm going to use something very topical at the moment. I'm going to use a mask. I'm going to train my model to identify if I'm wearing a mask or I'm not wearing a mask. So I'm going to call this one mask on. And my second data set, I'm going to say mask off. Okay. Now, from here, all I need to do is activate the webcam. And once I've activated the webcam, you can see as it comes up just here, and I'm going to add a range of different image samples here. And now, obviously, the more samples I put in, the more accurate this AI program will be. I'm just going to do it for a few seconds, and I'm going to move my head around so it gets some different views of my face without my mask on, and a little bit further and back. Okay, let's say 143, perfect. I'm going to chuck a mask on. I'm going to go down to the bottom, and I'm going to go onto this webcam. Actually, I've done that in the wrong one. Mask off. There we go for those playing at home. On, press and hold, and I'm going to hold and record. It's checking out my masks on. Going to get around the same amount sample size as well, give or take a few. Okay, so from here, what I can do now is I actually click on train model. And what it's doing now is the AI program is actually learning the 143 samples that I had with my mask off, the 149 that I had with my mask on, and it's using all of this to basically interpret me. And it's using all of these different AI programs that's able to analyze my face and the images that I've got into a very simple model just here. So as you can see, this is really very basic. You could use this with kids as young as 7 or 8. You can see here now I've got a little preview. So I've got my mask off. I can put this on and it will flip across, mask on, mask off. Okay. And then sometimes if it's not sure, it's kind of halfway in the middle. You can kind of see the output there as well. Okay. You can kind of confuse it a little bit because obviously with AI and machine learning, if you cover different things like this, you can confuse, and that could create some really great discussions around biased data and biased learning from machines as well. Okay, I'm very wary of time. Once you've done that, you export your model and upload it. Now, it's a cloud document, and you have to log in to be able to do that. And once it gives you this model, I have to wait for it. It'll give me a little link just here. I'm going to jump back into that new, the GitHub of Scratch, and it allows me to pop in this link. Okay, you can see the shareable link here. So I can copy this and I can head back to this program. And you can see already here it's jumping in, it's using a few different things. So now I've got these teachable machine buttons, which weren't there before. And I could do very basic, when start is clicked, run my model. Okay, and then I have a range of different, and I could obviously do lots of different things, but I could control stuff. I've got a great different things. I'm a bit wary of time, so I'm going to show you a little project that one of my students did. Let's have a quick look. No, it wasn't this one. My apologies. Very similar one that when your model detects mask on, run prediction is mask on, then get your mask is on. In my little horse unicorn says this, and so on and so on. So you can kind of get the idea, and it's a great one to sort of really play around with as well. And it's something that I know that those Scratch users out there would really love to see this. Just one little note that you can't actually save this. So any of the things that you do, you actually have to save them as a file down to your computer as well. Okay. So that's the quickest demo I think I've ever done on Teachable Machine and Scratch. But one of the Teachable Machine is one of the best sort of things that I found that kids really actually are able to understand. They put up different objects, be able to identify different things, different colors, and they can really do lots of things with that in Scratch, as you can imagine. So really, I sort of just want to end with that, so what is plausible or possible with AI? And everything is a lot. I mean, everything is possible. We look at the kind of plausibility. We've got different probable futures, and AI is already in our students' future now. So we really need to be teaching our students about this now to ensure that as they get older into the future, that they understand how these AI programs work so that they are able to manipulate them so the minimization of societal impact is lessened. So one of the things that AI probably can't do is make me Freddie Mercury. because I'm only apparently 11% Freddie. So thanks, guys. And I'll put a few links into the chat as well. And hopefully you enjoyed my presentation today.
Thanks, Kobe. Yeah, I really did enjoy it. Thank you. It was, inspiring and helpful, and all those things rolled into one, mate. Thank you so much. Some of the comments from people, someone said, we've got the community teacher saying, hi, everyone, that looks so useful. Ryan shared, I love how you're providing resources, take back into the classroom, those practical next day things as well. Sure. A commenter said, can't wait to try the drawing tool from Jane. Marku sharing, what a scratch treasure. So lots of takeaways and really useful, as I would expect from you, Kobe. So thank you very much.
And I tried to squeeze it into 20 minutes there, Mark. So for those people who want to reach out, please reach out to me, and I'll as I said, I'll share the links with you for all the resources.
Yeah, brilliant. Thank you so much. I did share one of the links, the experiments with Google link. I popped into the live chat, so that's available there. Yeah, if you wanted to pop onto YouTube and drop those into the chat there, that'd be great.
Yeah, for sure.
And certainly we can add some of these things into the write-ups that we'll be doing on Global EdTech on the site afterwards as well. But thank you so much for taking the time out of your evening to join us and share today. Thank you so much indeed, Kobe.
Great, man. Thanks. Good luck for the rest of the day, and I'll look forward to following along.
Yeah, brilliant stuff. Thank you so much, Kobe. Cheers. Right then, so next up joining us here at the Future of EdTech conference, we've got someone who doesn't really need much of an introduction. If you ever view me doing anything, Buki is very often normally involved in some way, shape or form. But senior leader at the EdTech school, she's talking about evaluating remote education. Buki is someone I've known for many years. I nearly always get her bio wrong, but she's heavily involved. I won't say heavily involved in Women Ed, in BAMEd, co-chair of the EdTech digital strategy group, with the DFE. Working alongside Caroline Wright, who we heard from earlier. She's an all-round legend, not just in her own timeline, but across the whole of not just the UK, but beyond. And I'm really excited and privileged to have Buki come and join us and share during the course of the event today. So, Buki, hope you're well. I know you're taking some busy time out during your school day and everything as well to be with us today. So with no further ado, what I'll do is I will bring your screen share up onto the screen and I'll hand the mantle over to you. And up after your session at 10:10, we're lucky to hear from Al Kingsley, where I'll be interviewing him about all things EdTech. So over to you, Buki.
All right, thank you so much. Okay, thank you, Mark, and thank you, everyone. It's great to be part of the Future of EdTech event day one. So as Mark kindly said, I am a senior leader in a special school, EdTech school. And what I wanted to do is just spend the next 10 minutes actually evaluating remote education and actually looking at what the next steps are now that we've actually had over a year and a half of remote education across the globe. Now, seeing this image, no one will be surprised, no one will, I'm sure, will obviously recognize what this image actually represents, the COVID-19 virus, and the changes that happened across the world as a result of that in terms of online education, remote education, or distance learning, the same experience coined by different phrases. And more recently, where we've actually had more of the schools across the globe actually going back onto the school site, but there have been a continuation in regards to blended learning, where you have some students, members of the community who are still at home for various reasons, as well as teaching the students that live in front of you, and actually just thinking about what are the lessons learned and what do we actually need to try and move forward with. Now, my session is going to be covered in 3 different aspects: looking at remote education and next steps, quick overview about that, looking at ways for us to actually identify our EdTech strategy. And what I mean by EdTech is how the platforms, the apps, the technology is being used in various ways to actually move the teaching and learning forward and also aid student progress. And the third aspect is evaluating EdTech claims. We've had experiences of trying things out that may or may not actually have worked within our school context, and actually thinking about, okay, if we want to consider different educational technology platforms, what are the questions we need to ask ourselves to verify the claims that are out there? So Gavin Williams last year actually made this claim, and I actually have to agree with it about securing educational technology's great leap forward. We engage with EdTech in ways that had not been experienced beforehand, and in some circles we joked about the fact that the pandemic actually allowed EdTech developments to leap forward by a decade, where many of us have actually been chipping away at the sides to try and get the same impact. With regards to the next steps, I'm actually looking at confidence. How confident are various members of our school community? And by that, not just the teachers, the senior leaders, but the young people who actually teach, and also the parents who are now more actively involved in the education of their young people. Now, within England, just to put it into context, in August 2021, the DfE actually reintroduced their remote learning plan, making it a duty that any child, any young person who was actually off school due to reasons related to COVID-19 still had access to high quality teaching and learning with regards to the educational technology that was actually being provided and implemented within their school. Now, it may be a little bit, you may not be able to see that. Some head teachers were seeing this was a bit of a shackle. And just to put it into context, it's been a turbulent year, and I think we've experienced it in various ways. But now that the ball in a way is slightly off with regards to remote education, going back into school with more of the school communities there, it's a very difficult challenge to try and actually undertake remote education as effectively as we have done in the past and ensure quality education secures the exam outcomes that we're looking at Key Stage 2, Key Stage 3, Key Stage 4, Key Stage 2, Key Stage 4, and also Key Stage 5 with regards to A-levels and BTEC. To give an example, last year, October 2020, every school and college had to have a remote education plan. And this is an example of the different ways in which it actually could have looked at. The different tiers looked at the different scenarios, whether you've got all of your students on site going to most of the students being off site for various reasons. There had to be a plan to continue with the remote education in that regard. Now, the Education Endowment Foundation produced some guidance about some of the things that would enable remote education to take place as effectively as possible. And they included opportunities for students to undertake independent learning. So the idea of bite-sized lessons. So whether the lesson was for, say, 30, 40 or 60 minutes, the opportunity for the teachers to deliver educational delivery, insights, knowledge in a short amount of time, but providing longer periods for students to work independently and to demonstrate their knowledge and understanding. Some of the insights also spoke about the effect and importance of peer assessment, getting the students to actually work in small groups. So they actually captured and shared some of the key aspects that would enable remote education to take place as effectively as possible. Ofsted also shared some ideas and guidelines, but they also highlighted about the fact that live lessons did not need to take place as the default. And there were a lot of discussions at the time about the fact that which was better, the teachers actually turn up for every live lesson, or having some of the lessons recorded so that the students could actually drop in and access them either live or in their own time and still engage with the learning. Ofsted demystified that and just said, so long as you find strategies that work best for your school setting or college setting and it aids learning and progress, it didn't really matter in that regard. The EFF, or the Education Endowment Foundation, actually then went on to provide guidance, as you can actually see, about, well, what happened from September 2021? How do we actually capture the great practice that actually take place understand the key learning, but move forward, particularly as more students will actually be on site. And they produced a variety of different resources that actually looked at targeting teaching, academic support, and wider strategies, as you can actually see here. But what made it key was the fact that they actually got schools and colleges and teachers, as well as senior leaders, to consider some of the strategies and practices that worked well during the remote education, distance learning setup, and think about how that could actually continue on when the school population had returned back on site. So things such as the routines and habits. A lot of schools anecdotally have actually shared that just shift back to being on site, staff as well as students are out of the habit of the particular routines because we've got used to working in a particular way in a virtual sense, and thinking about how do we continue that now that we're back on site, or even within a blended learning setup. So as you can actually see, there are a number of different aspects that have been highlighted, and a checklist for different aspects, all centering around the purpose of high quality teaching and learning. So no matter how it takes place, either on a face-to-face or virtual sense, it needs to take place. It needs to continue in that. Now, unfortunately, my animation has not worked. This should actually appear later, but I'll continue. So as part of ensuring that schools across the UK were able to access good practice with regards to EdTech implementation, remote learning, etc., the EdTech Demonstrator schools, which were actually created by the DFE, enable schools to actually visit in a real life sense or on a virtual sense to look at different aspects, so looking at how assessments are undertaken, how you can actually differentiate learning objectives, etc. That particular scheme ended in March 2021, but since then we've had national webinars, and they are taking place right now. But it enables schools, in fact, anyone really across the world, to actually contact and connect with schools who were part of the EdTech Demonstrator program, and they can actually showcase and highlight some of the practices that are taking place. If we look at the impact, now, as I mentioned before, we aren't just talking about the teachers now and the students within a school. When we talk about EdTech impact, we're actually looking at the wider community, because we've all engaged with it as we've never have done beforehand. So it's really important that school leaders continue to share the vision and purpose of their EdTech plans, but more importantly, in how it links to the school development plans. There will be particular aspects, there may be margins or gaps that you want to close that EdTech can actually fit into, and it's really key that there is alignment between the two. Your EdTech strategy, your remote learning plan, and your school development plan cannot exist in isolation. There has to be continuity and linkage between the two in order for you to have the impact that you desire upon young people. In addition to that, now is a good time to actually look at the skills. Now, there are lots of assumptions made about digital natives, millennials, our younger members of staff, for example, even our students who have the skills. So it's assumed to engage with any particular platform with regards to EdTech. While it may be true that they may have particular skills, particularly when it comes to social media, we cannot make any assumptions. So we need to ensure that we take place with some of the digital skills programs that the DFE are actually highlighting and providing, so that we have skills that are implemented and developed within school for our young people as well as staff, but then can be used beyond the school environment. So this just gives you an overview types of skills that you may want to actually assess. Doesn't have to be in much detail, but the idea is, what skills do your staff and young people actually have to utilize the platforms that you are implementing within your school or college environment, and how do you know? And more importantly, having a baseline, however shape or form you want to have it, is really key, because then you can actually see development and ensuring that the skills are being utilized and enhanced. What I often say in this regard is to look at the platforms that you commonly use and think about marginal gains. how can you ensure that staff and young people are actually using the platforms as well as they possibly can? So, for example, in my context, in my school, we use Google Workspace. And there are lots of different things there that many of us prior to the lockdown and the remote education plans that we actually implemented were not really confident in actually using. The key is to ensure that you have your staff as well as students engaging with bite-sized opportunities to train and develop their skills and regularly come back to it and enhance it as well as they possibly can do. For senior leaders, if you want to look at the bigger picture, I share examples of 2 documents. There are many out there that were particularly important because they were created during the lockdown, but also enable schools to capture where they were during the lockdown period and actually move forward. So if I share first on the left-hand side by Ty Goddard and a group of educators that worked with him about the EdTech Vision 2025, again, capturing what worked well and considerations for taking things forward, particularly with regards to students that's classified as having additional learning needs or special educational needs and disabilities, looking at accessibility strategies that could actually be implemented to enhance their teaching and progress. And a shout out to Mark Anderson and Al Kingsley about the digital strategies. They had created one just prior to the very first lockdown that we experienced in March 2020 and had since gone on to create a second version, looking at taking some of the best practices again and getting educators, school leaders to look forward. But we, whether we use those plans or not, have to make sure that there are key priorities that we still keep in mind with regards to digital strategies. So the assessments, there will be ongoing discussions about assessments, particularly when you have the formal assessments, summative assessments. If the students are off-site, there are concerns, I know, from many educators about whether or not the assessments are a true reflection and making sure that there's no cheating so that the results you get are a true indicator of the student's potential and progress. Use of assistive technology, I mentioned it before, but how can we ensure that students that struggle to access learning in the traditional ways have access to assistive technology that can unlock the learning, the teaching strategies and their learning in ways we couldn't have imagined? And as I mentioned before, continuing with that digital skills focus. Now, I've shared that particular point there. And the frameworks. So you just move on. If I go on to the last part about evaluating EdTech claims. Now, there are a lot of claims that are out there. Some of them, I think some are more pragmatic than others. But if I share this with you, Teacher Tap undertook this particular questionnaire. They asked a number of questions, and this basically was actually looking at educators and their claims. So if I was to use EdTech in the classroom, I would be unlikely to trust the claims made by the company selling the product. And this is basically what we actually got in terms of the results. And the need for clear proof to show that the EdTech actually worked. As you can actually see, the majority of teachers aren't likely to trust. Now, there have been changes, but as we continue and still engage with some of the challenges, those figures aren't really, there are still some that actually doubt the claims, particularly when it comes to, say, blended learning. We're learning in new ways. And when we encounter problems, that often makes us actually feel that the EdTech really cannot provide the solution. Ways around this and ways forward. So BISA have a number of they have a number of Learn Ed events that take place across the UK that allows educators to share their good practice and also allows school members to actually meet with them and actually just hear about the developments and actually have those particular conversations. As part of the Learn Ed experience, we have Lend Ed, where educators actually try out resources for a particular period of time and see whether or not it will actually help the EdTech solutions and aid the learning within their school context. You also have EdTech Impact, which provides an overview of lots of different EdTech solutions, and the schools who've actually tried them out and educators provide their feedback, so it gives you a better idea about what educators actually think, because at the end of the day, teachers listen to teachers, and we are generally more likely to trust the word of a teacher. SecEd also promoted a series where you had different industry experts who were asking about looking for robust evidence and getting schools and educators to think about the quality of education evidence that were actually being provided to enable them to see whether or not the solutions that were being shared were relevant for their context. And there were 3 key questions that were highlighted as a result of that particular feature. How specifically will X improve learning in my context? And looking at academic progress, which is still something that is ongoing. It's very, very difficult to hone into an EdTech solution, actually making that links to academic progress, because there are so many different aspects that are actually involved in that. And also looking at service level agreements, particularly what would actually happen if you were to break or actually decide to come out of the service level agreements. Usually there are very heavy penalties, and being clear about that. Dan Sandhu, as a result of that, then created the EdTech evidence group. So you actually have industry experts who come together and are supporting schools in actually making sure they ask the right questions to view the correct evidence that will help them actually identify about the EdTech solutions they're actually exploring. But I'm going to come to an end and actually just share some of these particular questions that you could specifically ask in relation to identifying whether EdTech solutions that you want to explore are right for your school context. So I close by asking, are there any other questions that you feel are important to ask? And what other issues do you need digital solutions for? Now, I ask that because we are in a privileged position where EdTech companies are now listening, and they are more keen than ever to ensure that the solutions they provide will actually have the impact within the schools. And I ask you to actually engage with them as part of the ongoing conversations around remote education within your organisation setting and with regards to implementing EdTech. Thank you.
Hi, Buki. Thank you. Buki, I'm always so impressed at how much you cover in such a short space of time. That was incredible. Buki, some great feedback in the comments. For example, if I bring this one in from Samantha, absolutely, Buki. Teachers often make the mistake of keeping tech and silos separate from academic subjects. Big mistake. They must be together. And then another one that I noticed from Tony. These audits are essential to feed into your risk assessments. As Buki says, nothing in isolation. Just a couple of examples, Buki. So thank you very much for your time. Of course, I'll probably be seeing you shortly. Yes, but enjoy the rest of your school day, Buki.
Thank you so much. Take care, Onan.
Okay, so what I would like to do now is share over a few slides really about global EdTech and what we're trying to achieve with global EdTech, and also let you know a little bit about our author community. So if I go on to this screen here, so hopefully you can see this is our kind of website where we feature all the latest news around EdTech, as well as voice and opinion from our author community and the events that we are running and so on. So our kind of mantra, if you like, for global EdTech is news, views and reviews. And really the whole concept of global EdTech was to try to bring the community together. We felt, Mark and myself as co-founders, around the time of the first lockdown, that there was a lot of disparate ideas. There was a need for cohesiveness and bringing the community together. We've seen that there were a lot of communities that, just as Buki was describing it, working in silos, we felt it was important to try to build something where people could share expertise on one platform, whether they be Apple Distinguished Educators or Microsoft Innovative Experts and so on. So our author community, we have over 50 authors from just under 30 countries representing 6 continents. And anyone listening from our audience, we are certainly open to expanding this for anyone who is passionate about education and, of course, the intersection of education and technology. Please do get in touch if you have a message you think would be of benefit to the community. We'd be happy to definitely expand the author community as far and wide as we can. But just to give you an example of some of the people we have on our team. So as I said, we have authors that represent all continents, and for Australasia, an example of an author is Karen Caswell. So if I just go over to the Global EdTech website and I go to the authors section, this is where you can see kind of the mini bios. But if I find Karen's, you can see her kind of blog space here, and she's contributed 2 articles already in the short space of time we've been running Global EdTech. She's a very passionate primary educator, Karen, and very active on social media. And she's a teacher mentor, Apple teacher, Seesaw ambassador, and she's written 2 fabulous articles here, one around how Seesaw has impacted teaching and learning, the other around strategy, which is again a key theme that's coming through today. And then we have Brett Salakas, who I think recently has taken on a new role as a HP ambassador. But Brett's very well known on social, very active, great guy, presented at our last conference and has already written quite a few articles, which are definitely well worth a look if you have a chance, if you pop over to the Global EdTech site. So you will find Brett Salakas down near the bottom, and you could definitely check out his articles. And I'm going to stop there because Kobe needs no further explanation, as obviously if you attended, if you've been listening to the session earlier, Kobe spoke very successfully on AI. His article is also in our brochures, which you can download from the site as well. So there's lots of links and lots to learn there from Kobe. And I can obviously share some more later. But I'm going to come back now because I know that Mark and Al are keen to get cracking and talk about all things EdTech. So, Mark, I'm happy for you to kind of take me off the screen and bring Al in.
Brilliant, Steph. Thank you so much, Ronan. Thank you for sharing that information about our authors as well. They really do bring such a fantastic perspectives to the site, and in a way we can bring that whole community together. As you know, I often share about education being a force for good, and there's far more that unites us and divides us. And I think the initiative we've got with Global EdTech really, highlights the best of education and educators coming together, sharing, regardless of platform, as a place and space where we can all learn from each other. We've had a lovely comment and question from Marco Vanasco. South America, is there any representation there? Yes, we have got representation in the LATAMs, Marco. However, if you would like to get involved, then we would love to hear from you too. So please drop us a line, either via our social media that you can see on the screen now, or via the contact form on the website itself. So it gives me great pleasure now to introduce, I'll just drop you out now, Ronan. It gives me great pleasure now to introduce somebody who has not only been a mentor to me in many ways for a long, long time, but somebody that I have a real pleasure and privilege of working with on lots of projects and things as well. And you may well know that I have a role as Head of Education at Net Support as well, where Al Kingsley, our next guest, is the Global CEO. Now, Al, as I bring him in, has got a really broad experience when it comes to the educational technology space, not only a vendor providing EdTech into education for more than 30 years, he's also the chair of a variety of multi-academy trusts. He's on the Regional School Commissioners Board. He's even written a book, which I don't have the book to hand, actually, but I do have some promotional material for the book in my hand. My Secret EdTech Diary. Fantastic read, even if I do say so myself. And he's not actually sort of pinning me arms behind the back to say that. But welcome, Alan. Thank you for your support, and thank you for coming on to the event today and sharing. I've shared a few things that you do. I've shared a few things that you get up to in education now, but for those that don't know you, is there anything else, and I know there is, that you could share more about your role within education?
I have lots of roles in education. I think most people who know me will recognise I'm fairly passionate, but I am also very much in the mindset of lifelong learning. I think we never stop learning. Certainly in my case, we never stop making mistakes either, but that's cool too. That's what you learn from. So yeah, as you alluded to, Mark, I'm chair of a couple of multi-academy trusts. I'm chair of an alternative provision academy for young learners that struggle in mainstream education. I chair the Employment and Skills Board for our region, which is really about creating and connecting the future workforce with jobs and skills that are being developed in the region. I'm an apprenticeship ambassador because, again, I believe that journey never really stops. I also chair the SEND Board as the independent chair for the region. And that, again, is really making sure that we've got a level playing field in terms of opportunity and provision to support our most vulnerable learners. So I get involved in lots of ways. And of course, as part of that, I'm always on a learning journey. One of our MATs has specialist provision for children with very complex physical and emotional needs. So I get to cover the full gamut, if you like, of provision that's available across our region.
So you're being kept out of mischief then. Do you still have time to learn new things yourself around all of this?
I think in the past I've referred to myself as an edu sponge. I think if you recognise, and I've probably said it too many times, so it's not really that informative now, but that kind of reminder of you were born with 2 eyes, a mouth, and 2 ears, and think about that kind of proportions of when you engage. And I think some people say, why do you get involved in education and how do you make the time for it? And I think that the answer is, well, one, you've actually got to have a passion to want to make a difference and support. But I also think if you're open-minded, you will always learn. And education is a fantastic space to learn. Interestingly, having listened to the great presentations we've had before, one of the lessons, and maybe we'll have a chance to pick up on it, Matt, in terms of the bigger picture, is really that kind of context of, well, vendors have learned about actually co-production and working and listening with educators. And that kind of reflective practice that's at the heart of education is something that I think many vendors, we can all learn from. We're very good at keeping our own secrets and not necessarily recognizing don't have all the answers. So yeah, it's a very broad reach, I guess.
The role you have within schools is really interesting, and there aren't many who can have that balance in both sort of camps now. Can you give us a bit more context about the schools you support? And with that in mind, given all that we've experienced in the last 20+ months of the pandemic, would you mind being candid and sharing some things that maybe with the benefit of hindsight, you might do a little bit differently?
Oh, I wasn't expecting a can you be candid, Al? So I'll do my best. Yeah, as I said, we're very lucky that the mixture of schools within our academies range from traditional primary school and secondary school provision to all through education. So very much from EYFS through to year 13, infant school, alternative provision and specialist provision. So across the different schools, all different challenges. And of course, that challenges links as well to the variety and diversity of our cohorts that come into our schools. So, we're on a journey. I think any school that thinks they're the finished article are fools. But the first thing I've learned is, let's just park the tech to one side for a second. The thing that we've really evidenced has been just quite how adaptable and capable our staff have been. The conversations over the last many decades have always, frankly, put, the topic of technology as well as other significant change onto that we haven't got time right now. And then here we were saying you've got all these extra responsibilities in terms of health and safety assessments, risk assessments in your schools, flexing the way you're delivering. And by the way, could you suddenly adopt and acquire a load of new technical skills? And yet most managed and did it. And in many cases, did it very well. There are some lessons learned, and I don't always like saying it because, of course, EdTech's my thing. And from a practical point of view, I've tried to instill that into many of our schools where appropriate. And sometimes we have to remember that, tech isn't the solution to everything. It's where it's needed and where it's valuable. Probably the biggest lesson we learned, and unfortunately it came down to a decision a few years ago from a cost perspective, was switching out staff having laptops to having front of class devices, PCs. That was more cost effective and meant that if there was cover, there was always a device front of class to power the screen or interactive whiteboard. And then suddenly we have a situation like COVID. And in effect, we've got an expectation that all of our staff have got their own personal device that they can deliver from in a remote location. And if we start to think about both that, we've talked very heavily across many platforms about equity of access for students, and rightly so. But we also had to sort of pause and think, well, we need to make sure we've got equity of access for our teachers, and actually recognize that often, relevant topic about teacher confidence. Certainly for me, if I walk into a classroom and I'm doing some STEM subject with the students and it's a strange device, my stress levels raise slightly as whether my memory stick is going to plug in, work, will they have the software on that I need, will everything go? Walk in the door with my own laptop and I feel much more confident about what I'm delivering. So there's a sense of confidence and consistency in the technology that's used. I think the other thing that we learn, again, pushing back on perhaps the broader EdTech mantra, and believe me, I'm not intending to push back for the wrong reasons, was the fact that we were more successful doing a few things well than lots of things a bit. And so actually focusing in on what those key layers were that would deliver the biggest impact, and that we could measure that impact. And as a result of that, we'd actually build confidence. And I suppose the final one is recognizing that all of this wraps around giving teachers the confidence that CPD, and you don't fix it in a 2-hour inset at the start of term. You've got to have a strategy for ongoing professional development, signposting of those flag bearers and much more. Oh, I'm going to love saying this. You're on mute, Mark.
And that never happens.
It's normally the other way around, so I'm going to just enjoy it for a second.
Just bask in that catching Mark out glory for a second. Now, I'm definitely a fan of the less is more approach, and you know that I'm a big advocate for marginal gains as well. But in continuing with that idea of being candid, Al, could you share one or maybe two things that you found that did work? Those few things that you did do well. What were they?
I suppose the most important one, and it wasn't necessarily the first priorities, we actually thought about that. How do we deliver our online learning? And our trust being an Office 365 integration, not surprisingly, Teams came to the fore in terms of how we delivered that. But actually, it's a byproduct of delivering that. And it was done largely pretty effectively, although every teacher was at a different point on their journey in terms of confidence. What we actually got as a byproduct was some really, really good and accelerated communication with our families and the broader community, particularly our harder to reach families that perhaps weren't so proactive at the school gate. And so we actually recognized, particularly in our primary and infant settings, that direct communication, that increase in communication allowed greater parental engagement. And so we might not necessarily have had our young learners learning exactly what we'd intended on the curriculum, but they were actually engaged with parents on all sorts of projects and activities we were able to share. That meant they were still learning and they were developing different kinds of skills and vocabulary and projects, and frankly just enjoying learning. So communication, I think, is a really important one. The second one wrapped around communication was, often with the pressures of the day, staff within different departments tended to be quite siloed in a physical sense. Come into work, staff room into your area, and there you were for the day. And by having different channels set up and back channels, Teams actually became a facilitator for a little bit more school-wide communication, whether that was for moral support or whether it was for sharing ideas and have you got, what do you recommend? And I think if we start to think away from the bricks and mortar of a physical school and we start to think of a cluster of schools that make up an academy or a school district, then of course digital removes those barriers and you can actually share ideas with peers in other schools that may be 5, 10, 15 miles away. And so actually it's recognizing those things that work well. And last one, conscious of time, parents' evenings, fantastic doing them online. Not only do we get greater parental engagement, but for staff, it was less stressful because the time allocation was managed. They could do it from home. So it was also good from a well-being perspective. And again, you have to embrace those small wins.
Brilliant. Thank you so much, Al. Some really useful insights being shared there from the chalk face, as it were. But it would be remiss of me to not bring up the net support word. So jumping into the sort of, if you could just change hats, if you could be Kobe for a second and just change your hat for or your mask for a second. It's fair to say that net support, as a business running for more than 30 years, it's a successful EdTech business. What do you think has led to that success that has enabled you to be involved and sell into the education space for more than 30 years, Al?
Well, I think the truth of it is some of it's been covered in earlier presentations. I mean, I'll start with the most important one. It's the team. You've got to have good people you work with, good people around you that have the same level of passion and desire to actually create and innovate and work together as a team. Life's too short if you don't get on and you're not enjoying what you do. I think the second one, and the reason why I said it's been shared already, Mark, is some of the stuff that's been shared over the last 18 months for EdTech vendors newsflash, is not new. The idea of co-production, the idea of evidencing where your technology is good and strong, and working with educators, and going beyond sending a brochure and expecting that to be sufficient to conclude a transaction. We've been doing that for decades. That's why we've been going 30 years, I would argue, because in the same way that social media is great for amplifying positives, it's also great for amplifying negatives. And so I think there's definitely a strand which is, as a business, we're, many will notice, we're pretty heavily invested in education. Many of us have roles in education away from the business workplace. And I think if we recognize that we're always learning, the more collaborative work we do, the more content and resources that we share in a productive and proactive way, it's because we care and because we want to see that. And we are in a fortunate position with 30 years on and the scale of our customer base around the world, that we do have in some regards more flexibility than perhaps some smaller startups in terms of how much of our time we can assign to being the supporters rather than the sales team.
That kind of leads into my next question, really, Al. Thank you for your response there. And then it's lovely actually to hear a comment from Tony Shepherd in the live chat, actually, saying Al is a facilitator like all tech, but a human still needs to be in the decision-making role. A lot of ethical questions involved, and you're clearly ethically minded from the responses you're giving beyond the business.
I suspect he was talking about AI, and one of the confusions we have at the moment is that Al and AI look exactly the same. So I'm happy to take credit that I will, as Marco's asked in the theme there, will Al possibly replace body teachers? And again, I suspect he was actually saying AI, but it's convenient because I like the idea that I could perhaps replace. Of course, just to very much dip into that, Mark, and sorry for taking us off content.
It's all good.
The simple answer is that there's two parallels there. I don't believe AI will ever replace the most important feature, which is the relationship and that dialogue between a human front and back of class. But AI absolutely has a role to sit alongside and support, whether that's to free up more time for the human to do what humans do best. We've got a bit of a Venn diagram going on here, or to do stuff in addition to, where we can look at the personalized learning pathways and other aspects. And I'd like to see other strands, whether it's the voice being just as effective as the keyboard and other ways from our accessibility considerations.
No, I'm definitely of that mindset as well. I mean, there are so many repetitive parts to the teacher's job. There's many ways that machine learning can really help, relieve those sort of administrative pressures and allow teachers to get on with the things that they do really well, which is, recognizing the relationships and building those and working on those and supporting learners and giving them the opportunity to do the main role of actual teaching, isn't it?
I think we've got to look wider lens as well, because when we often talk about EdTech, and we saw some of the questions for effective purchasing of EdTech, often the EdTech narrative and the questions are all about evidence of impact in the classroom, pedagogical impact, and rightly so for some solutions. But let's just take a step back and recognize that EdTech infuses across the whole operations of educational institutions. And if we're talking about, IT efficiency, safeguarding our children, communication, then those measures of what was the pedagogical impact and how much did it impact on teaching and learning don't necessarily stack up. So we also have to kind of think that whilst they're relevant, we've got to just broaden it and recognize that actually whilst the priority is there, there's a much bigger conversation. And those supporting things can free up time and potentially money, which helps more for the classroom.
Absolutely. And I mean, in those questions, it was talking about in their context, but sometimes it's important to actually flip that back and think about the EdTech tool in the EdTech tools context. There's fantastic tools for supporting HR functions, for example, or the HR, team could get lots of efficiencies and time savings and all these sort of things, but that'll never have an impact on student progress in the classroom. But you still want to have good HR software to support you with your role within the personnel function in your school.
But I will sign up to the comment that was posted by Dave Leonard, Mark, which I think is a really important one earlier on, which is part of that evolution of a business and longevity and development is we don't develop solutions for problems we think might exist. We actually work with educators to develop solutions for the problems they have. There is a bit of crystal ball gazing because the landscape is changing. But I think as vendors, we have to be willing to stand up and say, you know what, we need to adapt our solution because the goalposts have moved. I think that reflective practice is really important.
No, I definitely agree. Thinking about the pandemic, though, Al, I mean, it was tough. And I guess it still is tough, not just for net support, but for all EdTech vendors. During the pandemic, it's a really difficult time. Schools weren't really in the mindset for taking on lots and lots of new software. How did you manage the business through that really difficult time?
Well, it was certainly tough. I mean, many would be surprised to hear I'm only 23, and most of this graze appeared in the last 18 months. Well, how did we adapt? Well, the first thing is, from like many organizations where your revenue stream is linked to what you do, you have two choices. You either, hunker down, minimize your operational costs, or you invest in change. And we took a strategic plan to invest in change. So what we recognized was that the end point was never going to be the same as the starting point in terms of the educational landscape. We took a decision to take the things that we do within the physical building, the classroom or the school itself, that we're recognized for and do as best practice. So the classroom instructional technology, the safeguarding, the management of devices to make sure that they're reliable and robust. And we said, look, what we need to do is take the best of all those bits and deliver it in a format where the physical boundaries of the classroom don't matter. So when we think further ahead, we don't have to worry where the student or the staff is. More importantly, that CPD, you've got to learn one solution and it will work whatever the setting. So we developed classroom.cloud, and Classroom Cloud is very much built around that concept of something simple and flexible. And there's another lesson we all learn. We want to get good CPD in solutions. We want them well embedded and having an impact. Don't make them too complicated. Don't think it's a competition for who's got the most features and buttons on the top. So again, lots of work on that. And then tying back to the points that have been raised before by Buki and others, we then also, as well as co-producing with educators, we also then took it externally to organizations like Education Alliance Finland, had it independently assessed for its pedagogical content, had it used by teachers within the frameworks in Finland to actually both learn where we could improve, as well as get confirmation and evidence about how it would have the right impact. And that was a really, really, productive process. And what we do, aligned with some of the questions that I've seen in your comments there, is we have an evidence page on the website that answers those questions. It gives you the evidence, whether it's customer feedback or independent reviews, as well as preempting the questions that individuals might want.
Thank you, Al. Classroom.cloud's been around for a little while now. There's been some developments within the platform already, with the addition of safeguarding elements within there. I know there are some more plans for developments inside Classroom.cloud as well, Al. And obviously, Classroom.cloud isn't the only solution created within the business as well. What's next for net support, Al? And that's Al, not AI this time.
Yeah, good question. And everybody likes to hear from a vendor or a manufacturer of anything, nuts, bolts, widgets, robots, or software. What's your roadmap? Well, we've learned over the last 30 years that a roadmap's a bit of a misnomer, because if you sit down and plan what you intend to do for the next year or 2 years in terms of your development pathway, you're almost certain to be out of date and wrong at the end of that journey. So we very much look at what's happening in the marketplace and react, very much of working in terms of what's happening now, the narrative and the need. So our roadmap is quite fluid. What we have recognized is we know from 30 years that the core functionality we offer across our product suite is really well used, well respected, and is robust. So rather than reinvent the wheel, let's take all those elements and deliver it in a format that's easy to use, accessible, lower cost, but also removes that concern when we're thinking about digital strategy moving forward. Let's not worry about what those devices you might choose in the next 3 years are going to be. We don't care if you're Chromebooks or desktops or Mac. Have a solution that's consistent, that works across all of those platforms. Have something that once you've learned it, it's easy to use for everybody, easy for the central IT team to manage. And that's really part of our kind of focus now. What the actual features are that we add into it, and we've got very much the classroom instructional tech and the online safety, and we're now working on more of the technology tools for IT managers. But much of it's shaped by the feedback, the work that we do, working with educators, talking, finding out the pinch points. And let's not forget, challenges for teachers the last 18 months. Who'd want to be a school IT manager or administrator? They were the ones facilitating to allow the teachers to be empowered to do what they needed to do. So again, the last thing I think that schools want right now is loads of new stuff to install, implement, figure out, and teach. So we have to recognize that, which means it's tough in the marketplace right now. But we also have to recognize that when the time is right and when schools are looking at the solution that's their next step, we need to present all the information they need up front. And we need to make it really easy to install. We need to make it really easy to evaluate and try, so they have confidence it will do what it says on the tin. And then at the end of that, if they like it, we'll start a relationship, not a transaction, but a relationship with them.
Brilliant. I mean, there are so many sage sort of nuggets you're sharing here, Al, from across the board, from within, from within a school sort of space to the vendor space, and that mirrors really nicely with the content that's in your book, The Secret EdTech Diary, and I really should have gone and grabbed it from my. There you go. There's a copy there. And I mean,
am I allowed to plug it? I do apologise for plugging so obviously in the show. I should probably.
I mean, even yours has got little post-it sticking out of it with marks and comments in it and things. It really is such a useful book for so many people on so many levels. Al, would you like to spend just a moment, sort of just 2 minutes, if you have the time, just to talk a little bit about the book, and are you writing any more? Because there's so much great advice being shared, Al. It'd be lovely to have some more from you, really.
I won't bore everybody with a long summary. It's EdTech, past, present, and future, but it's written intentionally so that it's accessible to everybody. You don't need to be a techie. If you don't know the keywords, I'll try and explain them. We talk about all the context of how we move our narrative forward with educational technology, the lessons learned over the last 18 months, the checklists, largely around the questions you need to ask for your school and setting, as well as looking forward. The big value that's wrapped all around that is the voices of people that I trust from around the world who share their insights and expertise, the kind of links, the places to go to, my recommendations of where you can go and find out more. And I just wanted to bring EdTech not as a conversation just for those that are either into it or the techies in a school, but recognize that it's everybody's business. It's something that, I have my little bookmarks in there. I often say, you get to a certain age where you start to forget stuff. But I had to do a lot of research to get the right articles and resources that kind of framed and helped clarify my views on certain topics. So I dip back into it. In terms of future books, well, you've mentioned the kind of pressures from a work perspective. So at the moment, I'm busy working and supporting net support, as well as supporting our schools through a period of transition. But I would like to do one, which will probably not align with many on this particular platform. But I would also like to do one around governance and my experience over the last 20 years, supporting, challenging, and being that critical friend with schools. So again, different audience, and I may or may not ever get to the point where I can put pen to paper or mouse to keyboard, but that's one that's perhaps on the radar. Outside of that, there are some great EdTech resources out there. Buki shared some, you and I have collaborated on lots of resources, but there are a wealth from other authors. And I think, one of the things that's most important in our space is just to share. It's not a competition. Just share. When you see something good, put it out there, let others look at it, provide a platform, celebrate what we're good at, and let's change the narrative from, vendors need to change, we need to build confidence in them, to actually, the good vendors, we know who they are, and we do have confidence in them, not because they're nice people, but because the evidence sits behind it.
No, I mean, listening to that bit there, I mean, I'm minded of a fantastic conversation I had just yesterday, actually, with somebody you know well, Jordan Smithson, a local IT manager and a rugby coach as well. 23, he was really, obviously, as you all know, he's a big advocate for cloud computing and all these things, but he was talking repeatedly, driving home the message about collaboration over competition. And using the sources that are out there. He was championing using LinkedIn for asking questions. There's always somebody who's found this, or would have experienced the same problem as you. And it goes to that adage that I've shared a bit as well, like using Twitter is far better than doing a Google search. If you search for something on Google as a teacher, you'll often find a sort of top 10 pages are resources on the Times, on the TES. Whereas if you ask the same sort of question on Twitter, you're getting contextual responses, you're getting ones which are sort of related directly to you, you're hearing from the people who've done it themselves in the classroom as well. And so that collaboration, and that links into the sort of the co-creation of things you were talking about before, can really help to move things forwards in a way which actually ends up servicing that actual problem rather than, and like you said, there's still some crystal ball gazing, isn't there?
Yes.
But if you're trying to address and solve problems that exist, then you're more likely to be successful, aren't you?
Absolutely. And I would just, as a shout out, and I'm not trying to be a salesperson here, but if you've got 5 minutes, do check out classroom.cloud. And if you go to the /evidence page, have a look at the approach we take in terms of sharing that information and evidence. If you like it, great. And if you think we're missing something, then please connect with me on Twitter or LinkedIn and tell me what else you'd like to see there. Again, part of that learning journey, I want to make our technology as accessible and as easy for everybody to adopt.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And as Al said, you can learn more about Classroom Cloud at classroom.cloud. It's a handy product name when it's actually the address for accessing it as well. Makes it very, very easy. But listen, Al, thank you so much for taking some time out to come and join us and share your wisdom in so many ways, shapes and forms today. Thank you so much. Looking forward to hearing from you tomorrow as well. You're joining us on the panel conversation tomorrow, along with Wolfgang Soldner and Ollie Lewis. That panel discussion is taking place tomorrow. So look forward to hearing more from you then, Al. Thank you again.
Well, indeed. Take care, folks.
Cheers. Thanks, Al.
Hello. That's yeah, Mark's laughing. Thank you, Mark. And of course, thank you, Al. As always, Al has a wealth of experience to share, wearing so many different hats. I'm always really kind of blown away by his kind of just his insight. He's a bit of a, I hope he wouldn't mind me saying this, a bit of a grandfather of EdTech. He has been around and seen the good, the bad, and the ugly, the fads, and he knows what good EdTech is. He knows from working in schools, from working with teachers, what constitutes effective EdTech and what can really have an impact. So again, Al, that was great. Thank you. So we were supposed to be switching over to Angelito Balboa from the Philippines, but living in China. Perhaps he's stuck behind the Great Wall. So perhaps the firewall is keeping Angelito out from joining us right now. But if he does appear, we will definitely try and squeeze him in. So apologies if you were planning to see Angelito now. We'll try and bring him in later if we can. So I think what we could do now is we could share over a video with you, which was put together by one of our Nigerian EdTech authors, Dr. Ulu Renola, and she is obviously, she holds a doctorate in specializing in educational technology. So what I will do before we switch to our next main section, which will be a panel discussion, I would like to share this short video with you.
Well, the major EdTech trends for the years ahead will be an increase in the growth of EdTech startups in the country. We know that presently they're sparsely populated around, but we know that the EdTech industry is one of the fastest growing industry in the digital tech space in Nigeria right now. So an increase in the growth of EdTech startups. And also we see EdTech uptakes by institutions. Many institutions now, especially higher education, we see that more of that happening, and hopefully we will see more of government intervention in the sector also. Well, the aspect of EdTech adoption that I believe has been most successful has been the need to find alternative method of delivery when COVID ensured that most of our schools were locked down. And at that period, we saw the use of video conferencing tools. We saw the adoption of learning management systems and other platforms to continue engagement with the students. We saw digitalization of our content. So we had quite a lot of the contents now becoming e-contents, being digitalized so the students can have access to them and all that. So that has been very personally glad that that happened. I think that's one of the positive sides of the COVID. So we've seen a lot of EdTech adoptions during that period and even now, because we still have schools who have actually, though they are opened up, but are using the hybrid delivery system, and so they still have the platforms and yet are engaging in some way face-to-face with the students while not dropping that which they achieved or earned or adopted during the lockdown using educational technologies. one of our major problems is budgets and it's funding. I know that the UNESCO recommended budgetary allocation is about 27%. And as a nation, we used to do 6.7. And then the new budget, we have it at 5.6. And so you see it dropping. And this, of course, has its offshoots. For instance, we are still struggling with the basic education needs. We are talking about lack of classrooms in some schools, dilapidated buildings, lack of access to books and all that. And so talking EdTech again, that's really kind of far-fetched for most of the schools, especially those owned by the government. So funding and the offshoots of lack of funding is one of the major problems we have. We also have issues with power supply. And so even when you do want to have the infrastructure set up, you have the challenge of power. Some places we don't even have power at all in some areas. In some areas, the power supply is very erratic. And one needs to most times run on generator, fuel purchase, and all that, which raises the cost of running an institution. And so then data, internet connectivity is also one of our challenges, is also an issue. And where it exists, it's a bit high cost for institutions or even individual students to purchase more funding. Government seeing the need to put more money into the educational sector, more public-private sector collaborations. Yes, the EdTech startups and working with the government to ensure that they help bridge this digital gap and effective adoption of EdTech, the tools which have been put out there for school use. And yes, and again, I think enabling an environment for quick growth of these EdTech startups. And one other important thing is teacher training. We need quality teachers who understand how to integrate these technologies into the classroom.
Yeah, so a huge thanks to Dr. Ulu Renola for giving up her time to share some of the challenges that are being faced in the region, but also a sense of optimism about the kind of possibilities looking ahead. So I can see we have Buki is back and ready to join our panel discussion. So I'll bring Buki in. Thanks, Buki, for sticking around. Thank you, Buki. But I'd like to welcome John Neal with us today. So I'll drop John in now. How are you?
Hi there. Yeah, I'm very well, thank you, Ronan. Good morning.
Fab, thank you. And of course, Mark is going to step in for Angelito. As I say, unfortunately, maybe stuck trying to access this. He's currently based in China. So what I would like to do is to bring up the first question. And the first question is for the panel. And before I throw that up on the screen, it's probably worth just mentioning what the actual theme for this chat is. We're going to look at accessibility. I am pretty sure this is quite an emotive topic, something that will certainly have sort of a lot of opinion and divide within it. And it's something I personally have found a bit of a tricky issue in sort of recent times, where on the one hand, I think some of these tools that allow for accessibility and inclusivity are fantastic, and it's wonderful to see them being created. On the other hand, we seem to also be kind of stuck in the dark ages with what will eventually happen when they reach examinations, and there's quite a bit of debate whether we should kind of be holding back or whether we should be putting more pressure on moving forward. So that's the introduction. So the first question for the panel is, what are some of the best tools for promoting accessibility? And I would like to start with Buki.
Hi. there's a variety of things. I would start with things, say, like reading pens, where you've got, say, talking calculators, where you've got phonetics, spelling, software. I think that anything that can actually just enable the audio version of text is great. So I'll just start with those for the time being.
Yeah, fab. Thank you, Buki. And Buki, are those tools that you've used yourself, or you've seen other colleagues using along the way?
No, they're tools I've seen other colleagues using. I'm still very much in a simple aspect. So, for example, anything that can actually capture me actually delivering a lesson in bite size, I use those. So video capture, audio capture, particularly audio feedback, I love, and aspects that enable students to be able to read the text. So where you've actually got the software that actually reads the text so they can actually hear it in audio, they're very simple. I tend to keep things very simple just for the needs and to ensure that things don't go wrong as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Great. So I'll pass over now to John. John, would you like to pick up on that point?
Yeah, sure. Of course I would, Ronan. And I should say as well, a big hello to Mark and Buki. It's been a while. It's lovely to see you both. So I should say that that I'm actually no longer working in school now, but I can definitely speak to the wonderful experiences that I had in a career spanning more than a decade. And I think one of the really important things that I would always advise, Ronan, is that there are lots of wonderful baked-in accessibility features that come as part of your iOS device or your Chromebook or your Windows laptop or whatever it is. So I think that it's that sometimes we can be, particularly school leaders, can be wanting to act in the best interests of their stakeholders, of their staff and their learners. And I think that you can get a bit dazzled by what an EdTech company is offering, but you will often find that there are some really wonderful tools and wonderful ways that your students can have a new opportunity to actually access and engage with their learning with the tools that you already have. In terms of tools that are close to my heart, much like Buki, I'm a big fan of audio feedback, which is why I've joined the team at Moat, but there'll be more about that soon. But I know that, that if you're looking for tools as well, that it's great to engage with others across socials. For example, one person that I've learned loads from over the years is Mark. So really excited to hear from him too.
Yeah, cool. Thanks, John. That's super. And Mark, did you want to mention anything around that before we move on?
Yeah, thank you, Ronan, and thank you for your kind words, John. It's a bromance. I've learned an awful lot from John over the years as well. Someone I've always found to be very measured and tempered in his choices around technology use. And yeah, I know, a bit tearful, isn't it, John? But I would reinforce the comments made by Buki and by John. Taking one EdTech company as an example of a tool that I've used myself in school. There's a company called Scanning Pens that produce essentially a pen that you run along text and it can read it back to you. You can do that quietly through an earpiece, these sort of things. And the last time I was using them, there are two versions. There's one for in-class use, and then there's one which doesn't have all the extra features for in exam scenarios. So you don't need a TA reader next to you. You can use the actual scanning pen to read in an exam scenario. And I love EdTech like that. You know, it's like a Ron Seal product. It does what it says on the tin, and it doesn't try and be anything more than what it actually is. And it's really good. And I'd also reinforce John's comments about the baked-in sort of stuff that comes in your operating system as standard, taking iOS or iPadOS as a standard example. The ability to highlight any text and have it read to you straight away. Very recently as well, for support for EAL learners, the learners who've got English as an additional language, the new translation features which are built then into iPadOS as standard too. Sure, there's a Translate app, very similar in many ways to Google Translate, really, where you can have a conversation into a device and it speaks it out in the other language. The other person speaks back in the other language and then reads it back to you in your language. That sort of stuff's been there for quite some time. But having baked in translation features in there again, super useful. And I always remember a child that I taught. We brought iPads into our school in 2011, so quite some time ago now. But I'll always remember this child, the look of absolute joy in his face, because he couldn't speak. But the absolute joy of it, I mean, he sounded pretty Metal Mickey, but it didn't matter, because the fact that he could actually respond, yes, sir, when I took the register, the joy on his face, being able to actually engage in a lesson at such a basic level was just absolutely fantastic. So don't go looking for, make sure you check out the options that are available as standard on your device, whatever ecosystem you work in, what tools you've got. You'll often find what you need there without having to fork out any money whatsoever. But there are some tools out there, like Buki mentioned, with things like scanning pens, which are particularly useful, especially around sort of examination times as well. So that'd be my sort of 2 pence on that, really.
Yeah, great stuff. I think that kind of lends us nicely into the next question, which is, do you think schools should use accessibility tools given examination requirements? And as I mentioned, this is something, a kind of a discussion point I've been having recently with some colleagues, whereby there's a kind of a view that, yes, it's fantastic, obviously, to help students learn more effectively, but then this can breed an almost over-reliance on using certain technologies that they aren't actually allowed to use when they have to sit down and set a traditional pen and paper examination. So it raises a real debate around that. John, would you like to come in first on that?
Yeah, I would. I think the answer is yes. I think that schools should use accessibility tools. I think that schools are all about learning. And I think that it's one of the responsibilities of all of us that are involved in education is to bring as much access, as much equity as we can in terms of every student, given their unique abilities, being able to access and engage with the learning as much as they possibly can. I totally take the point about the way that exams are currently delivered, but I think that being said, that for me, that doesn't feel like that's that a consequence of that should be that in the years preceding your exams that we are knowingly taking away the learning opportunities of our students because of the kind of looming exams on the horizon. I think maybe that's something that if we were able to press pause, then that would be something that we could reflect upon.
Yeah, fantastic. I mean, that's quite refreshing for me to hear, because that's kind of my view as well, that we need to progress. So great to hear that you kind of have that view as well, but perhaps Mark and Buki feel differently. Who knows? Mark, would you like to come in next?
Yeah, no, absolutely. Thank you, Ronan. I'd be minded to agree with John, really, because, and technology is allowed in exam scenarios. It's about matching the needs of the learner to the situation that they find themselves in. I mentioned earlier when I was talking with Caroline Wright from BESA, I mentioned that panel of young people. They had three young people from the sort of sixth form leadership team, and then 3 young people from the sort of Key Stage 3, Key Stage 4 leadership team. And the head boy was talking about how during the pandemic he'd been facing lots of anxiety and issues, and his handwriting had gotten really, really bad. And as a result, he's now able to use technology through a whole host of meetings and setups with his doctors and the Senko in the school and all the rest of it. But you are allowed to make these affordances in exam scenarios if there is a need, and so he's able to access the ability to type his responses in. It's incumbent and difficult for the technical teams, though, to support these sort of things. That's really, really difficult. But the exam boards, it depends on the exam board that the exam is being sort of completed in. But exam boards will have rules and regulations that technicians can work to enable the student to undertake the examination using tools which help them. Sometimes that's being able to sort of speak because they've got perhaps they could be a paraplegic, or they've got lots of limbs that don't enable them to do that. Sometimes it's recording their voice, sometimes it's transcription, sometimes it's the ability to type things up. There are lots and lots of ways in which students can still access exams, but I think, like John said, education's a moral a moral business, and as educators, we've got a moral imperative to make sure that we have equity of access for all of our learners, regardless of their background and situation, and their starting points in life. And so, like John, I completely agree that we should make sure that accessibility tools are available to students in exam conditions. I understand it, like the provocation in the question is that the students are going to lose something because they're doing it this way, but actually they're going to lose far more, I believe, if they don't actually get access to the tools that enable them to engage in the classroom. I think back to that learner who had that joy of being able to say yes sir at the register. If it wasn't for that technology, how engaged would he have been? And it was a precursor for so much more. Once he was doing that, there was no stopping him. And so I think we've got a moral imperative to make sure we ensure that our young people are supported as best as they can be. It's how it should be, I think.
Yeah. Okay. And finally, Buki.
Well, in answer to your direct question, yes, it should be used for all the, reasons that have already been outlined by John and Mark. But I can give an example. So in one of the previous schools I actually worked in, I had, students who use devices. And in terms of accessibility, more often than not, it was just having access to a laptop because their writing speed was not great, or their writing was illegible. And I remember with one particular person for their exams, he was in year 11. He'd been using a laptop as part of his, normal way of working. And there were all these discussions about, is he allowed to use it in the exams? And, looking at the regulations as Mark referred to, and yes, he did. So what we basically provided him with was a standalone laptop, similar to what he'd been using, but it had no internet access. So there was no opportunity of saying that he was cheating or anything like that. And we could actually check before and after that there wasn't anything additional. So I think it's about, it's thinking out the box and actually thinking about, how can we make this work? Because we want our young people to feel successful. And in some cases or not, just having it reduces anxiety. Our students, if they're anxious or their mind's worrying about whether they can actually access the device or not, they will not perform as well as they possibly can do. And we need to work hard in removing any of the barriers that prevent them from being successful.
Yeah, fab. Thank you, Buki and Mark and John. I think it's a really interesting topic, and I suppose perhaps the devil is in the detail in many ways. In that, obviously, like you say, with certain examination boards, students may be allowed to use laptops more freely than others. But I think also, like one of the tools that I'll be training staff on quite shortly is the immersive reader, which of course is the Microsoft tools that are now kind of baked in to a lot of their online Office 365 apps and so on. And it was kind of born out of that kind of conversation around, whether or not they would be allowed to use those particular tools whenever they kind of start GCSE examinations and so on. So that was kind of the impetus that kind of got me thinking around this topic. But absolutely, it's I think we have a little bit of feedback there. I'm not sure from where, but it's certainly the case that there's a certain amount of tools that can be used already with some of the examination boards. Fab, right. So I think we've covered two of the questions, and that would kind of lead into possibly then this question, which is if we're all in agreement that we've got to progress and provide equity and allow students to learn to their full potential, then do you think the way students complete examinations needs to change? And I suppose in a more wholesale manner to allow for greater accessibility. And this time, shall I start with Mark?
I'll be very pleased to start and leave nothing behind for John and Buki to follow up with. No. I'm sure there's plenty that we can share, but no, absolutely, Ronan. The examinations aren't. Again, interesting conversations at the BESA AGM, actually, because they had people there from exam boards and linking into universities as well. And there was a question to, I forget the lady's name now, if Caroline's still watching, maybe she can put her name in, but she was involved with supporting universities across the UK as an industry, and sharing about British education within British universities. And the question came in about, you know, are A-levels, are the routes into higher education fit for purpose? Should we be looking at something different? Should we be exploring and recognising different ways of assessing students based upon competencies and skills, rather than just sitting down and filling in an exam paper? And one of the things that she shared was that one of the difficulties around this proposition, and don't get me wrong, I don't necessarily think the way we examine and we check the learning of our students is necessarily fit for purpose as it stands at the moment. But one of the things she did say, which I'm tended or minded to agree with, is that one of the difficulties is actually having a benchmark and having a standard sort of approach to how you do how you test young people. Now, obviously, you know, you're always going to get a bell curve of abilities, you know, from one end to the other. You're always going to get some students who achieve at the top end and some students who achieve at the other end. However, I do think that the time is right, particularly given how we've had to learn and do things differently in the pandemic, particularly given the light that many international schools, while some may offer A-levels, will offer things like the IB, which assesses and looks at the ways in which students learn in different ways. I think there's the pandemic, when it goes to that adage about you know, out of adversity comes opportunity, because I think we've got a real opportunity to start thinking about how we can do these things differently. So whilst I'm minded to agree with the lady that doing standardized tests is useful because it gives you a broad checking mechanism for how students have achieved across the board, you know, that doesn't necessarily reflect well for the students who learn in different ways. I'm not talking about learning styles, but those students who've got additional needs that need to be supported, and certain subjects don't lend themselves necessarily very well to these sorts of assessments as well. So yeah, I'm all up for changes. I'm all up for thinking about how we do it. How we do it, I don't actually know, but I think the time is right and ripe for a really renewed and vigorous conversation around how we assess and examine our young people prior to going off to higher education or beyond.
I couldn't agree more. When we look at the amount of digital transformation we've had and the acceleration during the pandemic, I think it's really high time for a good conversation around that. Thank you. Buki, would you like to come in next and add to anything there?
Yeah, I think this is a question I've been thinking about in various ways for the past year, because I don't think prior to the pandemic, the exams were necessarily fit for purpose, particularly for students, as you said, referred to, Mark, with additional learning needs and special education needs and disabilities. They may demonstrate progress in different ways. They may need to access examinations in different ways. There could be an opportunity, for example, if I think back, we had to provide evidence in terms of teacher assessments where the students were. And we captured those in different ways. Obviously, you had informal ways and formal ways. You had some things, say, like, for example, end of topic tests that they may have done or assessments they did in school that carried more weight than maybe homework and things they did at home. But I think we could explore opportunities of portfolios where there's like I would call an electronic capture. So it could be a student talking through something. It could be a student, a video or something they've actually explored or demonstrated. It could even be a capture of their response to an exam question, for example. We know that whether a student has additional learning needs or not, sometimes, many times, students can explain an idea orally better than writing it down. So I just think that I think now is a good time to explore the options, not just for students with additional learning needs, but for many students that can demonstrate progress in different ways. So they're just some of my thoughts.
Yeah, that's brilliant. And finally, John, is there anything that you wanted to add to that?
Yeah, one or two things. I think it's safe to say that I'm probably not the world's biggest fan of exams, Ronan. I think, but that sort of stems back to, I think about students that I taught both in my GCSE PE and then later GCSE economics. And just to Bucky's point, there is some of those students had such a wonderful appetite for learning, and in class discussion, when they were giving feedback and presenting, you knew that they knew their stuff. I can think of one lad in my PE group who things didn't particularly work out the way that any of us would have liked, and certainly the way that would have been befitting of his efforts and his contributions in class, because he didn't enjoy the exam piece. And I think to a girl in my economics class later who was absolutely top of her game, she was an unbelievable student. And the thing is with her, Ronan, is she got into such a state of anxiety about the exams themselves that she couldn't actually sit any of them.
That's terrible.
And I just think back, so, you know, to the past couple of years where there's been an opportunity for us to think about teacher assessed grades. And I know that teachers are professionals, and we all know that teachers are professionals. And I think sometimes from the outside looking in is that there's something which makes people uncertain about potential bias, etc. But I don't know the answer, and I know that that's often like a comeback whenever you say, well, I'm not sure that exams are fit for purpose, and people would just say, well, can you think of something better? And right now I can't think of anything that would be wholly better that I could present and articulate in a way that would be like changing the world of education. But I'm sure that there has to be something which just gives all of our young people the opportunity to not only to really enjoy their time at school, but to be able to take what they've done to kind of, rather than collecting the dots of certificates and things, to be able to connect the dots of their learning and to take that forward in their futures.
Yeah, that's super, John. I'll bring up the next question because I think that links in quite nicely. How can we engage policymakers and examinations bodies in this debate? So, John, I was thinking that links in really well in that obviously this is a big discussion which will involve a whole range of stakeholders. It's a debate that we need to kind of bring in teachers on. We need to bring in government officials and policymakers and everybody. We need to involve children, of course, and students and have their voice. So there's a lot to unpick. Buki, would you like to start on this? Just generally, what your views on how we can kind of move the conversation forward, really?
Yeah, I'm just thinking how to engage them. Policymakers, you need to be in school. You need to be in school and see students, you know, as John said, who either can demonstrate their learning within a class setting but struggle to get that replicated under exam conditions, or struggle to engage in a lesson. I think sometimes the problem is the fact that we don't know what it's like to be in the shoes of the young people we're trying to help. So, you know, a lot of the students, for example, I teach in my school will be just, classified as neurodiverse. And even I, as an educator, I don't always know firsthand. So I just ask them to articulate. So, you know, if we could get them to see what it's like and then think, okay, how, experience is, I think, the best teacher. And then think, if you're struggling to present something or engage, what would help me as a starting point? And actually just think more widely, therefore, what could actually help the students? I think there's a little bit of a disconnect between what is actually happening out beyond the school settings and what the teachers and the young people and parents, carers, guardians know would actually work. There needs to be more connect and better understanding, particularly about trying to understand and represent people whose experiences you may not even get. And I think that's part of the issue. So that's what I'd say. It's not an easy thing, but I just think that we need to come together more to have those conversations and better understanding. It's not about trying to give favor for anything. It's about making things more equal in positions that may not necessarily seem like that in a first instance, but will make a huge difference to those young people. Even if it's just one child. I work in a very small setting, and every single student that we make feel successful is a big win, because in a lot of cases they've not had successes prior to that, and I think that's so key. But yeah, ongoing discussion and connections and understanding.
Yeah, fab. Thanks, Buki. Mark or John, would either of you like to follow that up?
Yeah, sure. I could just jump in quickly there. I totally agree with everything that Buki said. I think that one of the most important ways in which and that you can immediately find out that the way that things are in schools is to actually visit schools. And I think that speaking to teachers, speaking to students, and actually just being really open to, and I guess having a slightly brave approach to thinking, rather than what are the tweaks that we might be able to make to the way that exams are currently delivered. Is there a way that we can actually, rather than just those kind of mini 1 or 2% tweaks, are there kind of some bigger changes that we'd be able to make? I think trust is really important. I think being able to trust in what teachers and school leaders and students, and also parents as well, would say about the very unique, again, as what Buki says, like all of our learners and all of the young people in our schools are beautifully different. And it's just to be able to get as much of a sort of tapestry as possible, I think can only help the ways in which we do all those wonderful things with learning, but also preparing our young people for life after school.
Fabulous, great stuff. Mark, did you want to mention anything?
Yeah, if that's okay, Ronan. Like John, I agree with Buki and John and what they're saying there. I think getting into schools and finding out what the pressure points are at source is super important. But I'd flip it as well, and thinking about, the World Economic Forum spends so much time doing research and speaking to industry. I think whilst it's important to sort of get in schools and find out what the needs are of the learners, absolutely, and how we can test these competencies and skills and knowledge and all the rest of it. And knowledge is important, absolutely, I get that. But if we're looking at the sort of the top 10 skills that the World Economic Forum talk about, it's things like analytical thinking and innovation, active learning and learning strategies, complex problem solving, critical thinking and analysis, creativity, originality and initiative, leadership and social influence, technology use, monitoring and control, resilience, stress tolerance, flexibility, reasoning, problem solving, ideation. Where are these being actually explicitly not only taught but also tested for, and how is that being done? Because the report from the World Economic Forum has come from conversations with businesses and industries from around the world. So, yes, sure, we need to make sure we've got numeracy and literacy context, and we're testing those things in order for us to be functionally literate and functionally numerate, in order to engage in society, so we can go to a bank and know how to bank and pay for goods and manage a budget and all those things. Super important. But what about all the rest of it? How are our learners going to get into this? I'm thinking about John, myself. I can see Rachel Coatups in the audience here. When did we, John, Buki, Ronan, when did we in our training learn how to do all the things that we're doing now? And how has it been assessed? Are our A levels or our degrees relevant now even? So where are these? And Al earlier talking about the need for lifelong learning. I'm as you know, I'm a big fan of Al and all his work. But the support he does around apprenticeships and supporting young people to sort of have that lifelong learning thing. Moats, to think about John's company that he works at now, didn't exist 5 years ago. We talk about preparing children for jobs that didn't yet exist. Some of us here on the panel now are living that actual reality right now. So I think it's a real ripe time to try and change and move things forwards. But I think it's not just a case of talking to those in school. Very, very, very important, because the chalk face needs to be recognised. But we also need to think about the workforce and the competencies and things that the industry and businesses actually need in order for us to be successful into the future too. So it's not a simple thing, but yeah, it does need to change, doesn't it?
Absolutely, and I think we've come a long way in this conversation, starting with accessibility, which has obviously migrated into a much larger conversation, and perhaps some of it almost appears rhetorical. But I think it's important that if we're kind of almost being cautioned about using tools that will help children learn more effectively, then we need to really make sure we continue to promote this conversation around, well, what are we actually trying to do here with children, and what are we trying to achieve in education? So Buki, John, Mark, thanks so much for joining the conversation. And I think that it takes us up quite nicely, John, if you still have time to deliver your presentation. Good stuff. So Buki and Mark will exit stage left. Thank you very much.
Okay, so I'm hoping that you'll be able to push my screen to the stream, as it were. There we go. So yeah, so coming straight out of that panel conversation, here we are in a virtual conference. It's super easy for me to now be here alone delivering this presentation, and this is about my own journey from working in a school to now, as Mark mentioned in the panel, working with an EdTech company. I'm going to go into a little bit more detail, but my current role is a Vice President of Education at a company called Moat. In case you haven't heard of Moat, we provide voice messaging solutions. My name's John. Started working for Moat in February of this year. I've got a wonderfully enjoyable role in which I can engage with the educational community, do lots of things on social media, engage with our product team as we look to try to develop tools and ways in which educators and learners can best use their voice to do all sorts of wonderful things like save time, really improve accessibility, as we just spoke about, and also look to really provide opportunities for them to all develop in their learning. Learning's super important to me. Having started my teaching journey back in 2004, and then on with a couple of kind of steps along the way that might indicate that perhaps I've got a slightly odd career path, but maybe it's less odd than perhaps it might have been a few years ago. Right, so here we go. So I am here with my current role, and I'm going to have this presentation split into like 3 parts. So we're going to look at how it's happened for me, the kind of why, so what I've always put at the center of what I've tried to do, and the things I think have helped propel me into the position that I'm in now. Hopefully still contributing to the educational greater good. So if I just jump onto this slide here, this was kind of this. I was smiling as Mark was speaking in the last section, because lots of what he was saying was actually resonated, and there is some overlap with this particular deck. So this was the shift happens. Did you know slide deck was, or video I should say, was very much doing the rounds across schools in the UK kind of 10 or so years ago. The original version came out in 2008. And I can remember in my own school, so a large secondary in Hampshire, looking around the assembly hall, seeing the faces of the students, but also the faces of the staff, as we were realizing not only that things were changing, but how fast these changes happen. And the simple facts and some of the takeaways, and it's still a great video now, and I know they did an update in 2018 as well. But the simple facts that were being shared were really, really striking. Like the average person, I know there's no such thing as an average person, but the average person will have more than 10 jobs in their lifetime. Okay, so the average person is expected to have double figures. They're going to have different career paths, different opportunities. They're going to really allow them to do lots of different things. And I can remember looking at my students thinking, wow, you know, lucky you, this is such an exciting opportunity. And just as Mark said as well, that it's really important that we not only prepare our young people, as it says, for jobs that don't yet exist, but that we give them the skill set and the confidence and the competence to be able to develop in ways that when they leave the educational system, that they are able to contribute and to be excited and take brave steps to do things that perhaps aren't yet on the menu. And who knows where we're going to be in a few years. But one of the interesting things, I think, for myself and lots of the other teachers is that we were always thinking about this sort of discussion, the multiple jobs, the jobs that don't yet exist. We were always thinking about that through the lens of our young people. And we were feeling the responsibilities of preparing them for this future. And I think that one of the things that I certainly wasn't previously great at doing was being able to take that same sort of mindset and applying it to my own situation. Like, these are really important things, obviously, for all of the students and for all of the young people that we're blessed to engage with and to see them grow over the years, but also for our own selves, like how can we fit ourselves into that particular jigsaw? So that's a really important question for me, and it was kind of, and it still is now, is when I think about that. And you know, as I say, I do have a slightly different career path, and I think that there's this meme, I don't know if you've seen it before on the internet, which has been like, there's a kind of how's life thing, and I think the way that I was feeling is that everything's fine, you know, that my career path is kind of, you know, go through school, get my degree, get that kind of certificate checked off the list, and then I'm on the escalator of this is where I'm heading. But actually, with a little bit of reflection and thinking about my own kind of where I'd been and then perhaps where I was going for, the track was a little bit more like this. So it was, you know, this isn't to say that I was falling off, but I think that there have been different things that have been presented to me, different opportunities that have meant that things haven't quite been this kind of plain sailing, or this, you know, the typical sort of escalator that we might traditionally expect for ourselves in particular. I think that that's important, is often through the lens of students we can picture and we can paint that story to them of, you know, lots of opportunities, but for ourselves, maybe we think a little bit more of that single track there. So this is a super short summary of my journey into where I am now. So I always wanted to be a basketball player. I had huge ambitions to go over to America and, you know, make money and have fun and, you know, make that my career. That didn't work out, but I had fun trying. So for a year, I played in the English Basketball League and had lots of fun. But it wasn't for me, so I actually went back to university. I did a master's, and then in 2004, I kind of fell into this role where I was working for an accountancy firm, Deloitte. So I was working in London. It was just kind of felt like it was the obvious next step. But then I can remember in 2006, speaking to my best friend's dad, who was a director of sport, started out as a PE teacher. And I hadn't ever seen the passion that he spoke about his role from anyone that I'd worked with in the past couple of years. And pretty much within the next few weeks, I'd actually spoken to my manager at Deloitte and said, you know, this was going to be a time when I'm going to be moving along. And long story short, I became a PE teacher and transition. But the big changing point for me in education was about 2014, when I came across EdTech and digital learning. And, you know, fast forward another 7 years, here we are, 2021, and I've taken on what I think is a really exciting role in a brilliant EdTech company. So I think that it's really important that when we think about taking steps, and when we think about our own careers and options, and when I think about, for example, my own children as well, is to have the idea of the Simon Sinek starting with why. Like why might I want to be reconsidering my options? Why might I want to be potentially having a shift of focus? And also articulating those same ideals to our students too. And I feel like one of the things that I always wanted, for example, for those students I would see on a daily basis in my tutor group, was I would always want them to leave with a passion. I'd whether that was they wanted to be an accountant, perhaps that was what that person was really passionate about. Or maybe it's that they wanted to pursue a career that was in something entirely different. But the point is that they had that passion and they had the confidence to actually go out there and to do their best to achieve it and believe that they could as well. I've had countless conversations with teaching colleagues over the years, wonderful, wonderful people, where one of the hardest things, because of all the pressures that there are from exams, as we just spoke about, to wanting to make sure you're always being there and doing the best for your students, that you're engaging the parents in those crucial conversations, and that you're doing all of the other jobs and all that's involved with being a teacher, with the planning, the preparation, and the marking, and the really championing those students in front of us. one of the kind of trickiest things, I believe, is putting ourselves first. Not all the time, not kind of putting ourselves at the center of attention, but just being able to think about speaking in the same way as we would to our students, or to our closest teaching colleagues and our closest friends outside of school, is what are you passionate about? Like, what is it that you want to do? And this isn't a question that we only have to ask those, the teenagers, etc., that we're working with, but what does passion look like to us? I think that most teachers, when they join education, they're not joining for fame and fortune, but there's a shared why, which I think centers around making a difference. And that can be in any number of ways. That could be for those students that you have right in front of you there. It could be for your colleagues, or it could be perhaps you are, just as I found around 2014, that the difference that you want to make is kind of not only within your own school, but you want to be connecting with a wider network of people, where you want to be sharing with them your own ideas, but also learning from them. So making a difference and taking on can, from my perspective, take on a variety of different meanings. This is a statement about EdTech that I love. It's George Couros. And so I'll just go ahead and read it, which I'm not a fan of doing straight off the slide. But technology will never replace great teachers, but technology in the hands of great teachers is transformational. And I think one of those important conversations, and the importance of being able to speak to educators who are, as I say, who are wonderful professionals, is that there isn't a threat from these tools taking over their roles. Just like any other tool, or just like any other skill that you have in your teacher tool belt, technology is just one of those things. It isn't to be used all the time, but when you give it to someone who knows their stuff, who is a pedagogical mastermind and can just tell stories to students that really engage, when you can help them and support them with using technology that is relevant and purposeful, going to look at that in just a second, it can be such a wonderful, transformational learning experience. I know Kobe is part of this conference as well, and I just got that a little screenshot there. So this is from 4 years ago. EdTech to me is a great word because it puts ed first. It puts education first. And it's super important that whenever we are choosing any tool, digital or otherwise, that it is driven by the needs of our learning community. And as I reflect upon the role that I have at Moat and the way that we're trying to serve the educational community of, we have many users all over the world, and it's trying to make sure that all that we do is serving their need. One of the things with EdTech need to always keep in mind is that, particularly when we're sharing tools and sharing new ideas, is that it's purposeful. And so I'm sure we've all had those colleagues who, for really good reason, might have had, perhaps they've had one or two bad experiences with technology before. And if you can't demonstrate to them immediately the power of a tool, or the relevance it has to them and the course that they're doing, or the current particular topic that they're doing, and the ease with which it can be applied, we all know that it's going to be a much harder job to get them to adopt that particular tool. So one thing that I always found super useful in my old role, so my former role at a school in London, was trying to do my best to work alongside the teachers, to put myself in their shoes, to have conversations about where they wanted things to go, so that any suggestion that I made would be with a purpose. And I have to say that sometimes the suggestion was, we don't need to use technology for this. In fact, technology might even get in the way of what you're trying to achieve here. So it's having that there too. And one of the other things I really believe in terms of EdTech is this idea of digital citizenship. But there are two tweaks I'd make to that. And I think, perhaps the last couple of years has really helped to reframe this in lots of our minds. But there is less of a need now, at least I believe, to have the word digital as part of digital citizenship. I think if we can if we can have a culture in our own schools and our learning communities in which everyone sort of knows the ways to behave and the ways to promote positive action, is it becomes less about digital and more about just doing the right thing. And that's where it's really important. And I'd recommend, if you haven't seen it, there's a really wonderful keynote from Richard Culata, who's the CEO of ISTE. And he speaks about digital citizenship. He speaks about citizenship. And he starts with this thing that really struck with me, is that often if you go into a school and you speak about digital citizenship, the young people are very good at saying, well, this is what we can't do, and this is what we, shouldn't be doing, and et cetera, et cetera. But it becomes a really powerful conversation when you can flip that and you can start to think about all of the positive ways in which you can use technology, the ways in which, as Buki said, you can use your voice to really amplify learning and to connect with people that without technology, you wouldn't be able to. Jumping on here, just to give you, so these are just, this is by no means a kind of playbook of what to do or how to do it, but these are the things that I would recommend from my own experience of taking that move from coming out of the classroom and then going to working, as I say, within an EdTech company moat. Lifelong learning is more than just a cliche. It's really important. And I don't think that I've ever met a teacher who isn't interested in this. There isn't something inside of them that wants to understand more. Sometimes there are lots of constraints that can mean that keeping up with that learning can be quite challenging. But then, as Mark says, perhaps we can rethink about how constraints could lead to creativity. One of the things that really helped me, and I saw someone dropped into the chat there, I think it was Rachel, was talking about engaging with socials. When you find your tribe, so people that you have a shared passion, they haven't got to be working in your own building. If they do, then that's great. If they work on your campus, that's wonderful. But there's nothing stopping us with the technology around us to be engaging with educators all over the world, and also like having a look outside of education. So what are the innovations? What are the things that companies are doing? What are the things that universities are doing as well that we might be able to bring into our own classrooms and colleges? And also try not to be just a passive observer in those conversations. Everyone always brings such an interesting perspective. Find some Twitter chats to engage with. Join a Facebook group or two. There are some great ways that you can share and learn. So the second point here was definitely been a bit more of a challenge in the last 20 months, but attending events and conferences is a really good way to get yourself out there and to meet educators, attend things like teach meets, to be prepared to stand at the front and to share your ideas. And when you attend events as well, I would definitely recommend speaking to the people behind the product. So go ahead, like if you ever see Moat at an event, please come over and speak to us. We would love to hear your own unique perspectives, but just do that with all of those tools that you're thinking about using, or indeed that you are using. It's really eye-opening, both from your own view as a teacher, but also from the company's view, trying to find a way that relationship can be as beneficial as possible. And I put that thing at the bottom about relevant tech and technologies and the way that things are changing. So I think that if I think as recently as a year ago, I can remember, so I started to use TikTok as a platform. So I think it's a really great platform for storytelling. And I was a little bit more hesitant about using Discord because that was something that my students were using. And I know there are one or two areas there that probably would be of concern to schools. But it's worth, in my opinion, it's worth jumping in so you can try these different things out. You can see where things are going, where conversations are happening. I mentioned that with TikTok in particular, like I just think it is a great way to develop everyone's storytelling. And that's certainly something which I'm actually utilizing every day, for example, in my role at Moat, when I'm coming up with things to share on socials, making videos, etc. Just trying to keep things as engaging and as powerful as possible. It's always good to set ourselves a challenge. There's this idea of do what you can't. If you haven't seen it, there's a great video by Casey Neistat I'd recommend that you jump in and have a look at. I think I've certainly been guilty over the years of not doing things or not taking leaps because I've seen them as, this is probably a little bit, it's fine to say, go outside your comfort zone and go outside the box and whatever. But I think there have been times when I've certainly, if I reflect back, where I've been guilty of not doing that. So I think just having an occasional challenge of putting yourself perhaps in a position, doing a YouTube show, something like that, creating a podcast, just something that you feel slightly uncomfortable doing, but that someone else, and more often than not, lots of people are going to get some benefit from, is great. If you're into EdTech and using different tools, I cannot overstate the value of creating demos that you are, more often than not, that you're intending to share with your own school and with your own communities. The companies, EdTech companies, watch these videos and are amazed and impressed by everything that their communities create. I can only speak to what happens at Moat, but I can guarantee that we see all the videos that are shared across socials, that we share them as a company, that we discuss them, and we notice that if there are any kind of pain points that we can help address. And the reason this is particularly relevant to me is because actually this is exactly what happened with me. So Moat was launched in March of 2020. It just so happened that coincided with the start of the global pandemic and schools going into lockdown. Now, we are very much a voice-first company. So we're all about using voice to connect and to accelerate learning, to provide accessibility, etc. So I put together a demonstration that I shared as part of a wider EdTech demo slam. And the CEO of Moat, Will, sent me a DM to just say thank you. Thank you for sharing the product. And more than that, he actually wanted to connect with me to find out what my experience was, but also from his perspective, it was just as important to find out what my whole school's picture was. So what my colleagues might think of it, how the students were. And that's where that connection piece at the bottom there is so important, is when you see that there's an opportunity, really just go ahead and grab it with both hands. Like, the worst case scenario is nothing's going to come from it. But whenever you have a meeting, there's always going to be like, people meet because there's going to be a benefit for all parties. So don't think that if it's a CEO, if it's someone else who's got a very important sounding role, don't think that they aren't getting as much, if not more, value out of a meeting with you than you would be for them. Have questions that you think will provoke and will challenge and that will drive learning forward and that will challenge their team as well. So this is coming to the end now, but so Mark and I actually, years ago, we undertook the Google Innovation Academy at the same time. And it's all about a 10x mindset. And I've always tried to keep that in mind since. And one of the things that I always believe and always have done is that educators are really super extraordinary. The things that we do as teachers, or that you might do as teachers and as school leaders every day, covers so many skills that all sorts of companies, EdTech included, are falling over themselves to be able to find people to join their team who can think on their feet, who can put a learning plan together, who can present comfortably, who can, deliver and work with a team and to fit in and be part of a kind of positive culture. There really are, like, the people that you work with every day, they will all be able to. I'm sure that you could see, if you look around your staff room, you'd be able to think about a different 2 or 3 different jobs, probably everyone that you work with. Don't be afraid of pressing pause and kind of on the escalator of education, kind of thinking, this is where I'm going. Like, where do I see myself in 5 years, in 10 years? If you want to affect a shift, like down the line, do you need to be thinking about exactly where you are now to better take steps to achieving those goals? It's a little bit corny, but for me, something that works as well is thinking like, and at times of the pandemic too, where we were all working from home, is what advice would you give your best friend if they were in your shoes? And that, as I say, it might be a little bit cheesy, but it really helped me. And then just finally to think of, we have been through a unique, challenging, all sorts of unprecedented circumstances since February, March of 2020. I think one of the opportunities that we have as stakeholders in educational communities, and that certainly that you would have as school leaders and teachers, is to ask a few more what if questions. So we spoke just now about exams and accessibility and life after school and moving on to university. Well, what if things were a bit different? What if the only way of evidencing your learning and your progression at school didn't just come again? What if there were a way to have those digital portfolios and the other ways in which Buki was mentioning that students might be able to share to someone, be it a university or otherwise, this is what I've done and this is what I can bring to you, and really empowering and really enabling them to have that sort of mindset where they can go on rather than just saying, I've done very well in my exams, thank you very much, but being able to go in and having conversations about how they will readily be able to contribute. Okay, thank you ever so much. That is the end of what I was hoping to share with everyone. Just wondering if anyone's got any questions. I can see Mark's jumping back on here. Hi, Mark. And a massive shout out to Paola from Slides Mania just for being an all-round wonderful person. There you go. I can't hear you, Mark, I'm afraid.
It's okay. You can hear me now. One of the lovely things about today, as well as all the insights being shared, are resources and things as well, John. Some of the things shared by Kobe, for example, earlier were hugely sort of resonating and popular within the live chat. A shout out, to Slides Mania, fantastic resource. Please do check out Slides Mania on social media, and the resources being shared there, again, available to educators, are brilliant. So many innovative approaches to using slides and presentations in different ways, aren't there, John?
Oh yeah. In terms of slides, yeah, I was just having a scan through the comments there, Mark, to see if there was anything that I could, to see if I could help out or to, give any insight, perhaps.
No, so there's lots of lovely comments coming through, both in the live chat. Emily Goodwin, for example, saying great quotes being shared there, and you mentioned Rachel's comments as well.
Yeah.
Colin Hickey, sort of going through and talk about the career path. He said, never once thought about what my career path should be. I feel I've done well in my career so far, but I wonder if people who do visualize their career path become even more successful. My journey, like you, John, I fell into it. It's been a byproduct of the stuff that we've both been doing, isn't it?
Yeah.
But equally, there's a lovely comment, and I can't share it publicly because it's on Twitter, but Buki has shared a lovely comment, and with your forbearance, I'll just read it. She shared that the advice that you're sharing during your presentation for educators looking to get more into EdTech and beyond resonates with her. She's sharing the strategies that you shared, John, about keep learning, find your tribe, and connect with them and learn with each other. Step outside your comfort zone, attend events, and not just attend events, but be present at those events and actually present at those events as well. It's a great. I mean, I remember when I started, the first Teach Me I shared at, I was a dribbling mess. It was horrible, but I think it's when you step outside your comfort zone, you learn so much more, and it gave me a hunger to do better, because I knew that I needed to do better for my colleagues, to be able to present to them and share and do all those things, and also staying on top of current of new technologies as well. That's one of the things which excites me the most about EdTech, is that things you always move forward. I saw a really interesting post. And based on an article by JISC being shared by Scott Hayden last week about the use of Discord in education. Now, as you know, Discord's a platform that many young people use for connecting on their servers about gaming. In fact, I use it for Pokemon Go.
There you go.
But part of that there was that learning journey, about learning new things, because as we've seen with the likes of Mike Tholson, product manager at Microsoft, his quick tips on TikTok have been absolutely phenomenal.
They're great. They're great.
It's such a great platform, and it gets you really thinking about how to deliver CPD and how you can best support your colleagues and all the rest of it. But like when we discussed what your session was going to be about, John, I thought it would resonate with many. It really has, and it's really resonated with me too. And thank you for being honest and sharing about your journey. I remember Panji and the conversations about basketball way back when.
Oh my goodness, Mark! Yeah, I feel like, and we've had lots of those, and we've had a few table tennis games along the way as well.
Yeah, but that goes, John. I think the power of being able to do what we do now actually is the things that we've done over the years that other people can replicate. Yes. Whilst it may have happened by accident, as it were, the things you've done, the sharing your videos, the fact that Will saw your work around Moat, look where it's led to. And certainly when you made those resources, you weren't thinking, right, how can I get out of my school and start?
No. And I think that for me, and particularly being on the other side of the fence, Mark, I think that's been so important, is that we as a team, and I'm sure it's the same across EdTech, we love seeing when people in our community create content that they're designed to share and to really help their own communities, and then we would then connect with those people. And I'm often doing that, just like thanking people for what they're doing, and I'm sure it's the same across the board. Like we are, in comparison to the Microsofts of the world, we aren't quite there yet, but I'm sure that they have an eye on everyone that's creating content, and it's just a great thing it's a win-win. You are putting yourself out there, as you say, Mark. You're trying something different. You're putting yourself out there to be seen and watched and engaged with by other people too. But it's also you always think about, how am I creating this content so it's going to best help and best support those people that I would most like. It isn't because you've got the back of your mind, I wonder if person X is going to be seeing this, or person Y. I think in the majority of cases, person X and person Y will be seeing it. But yeah, like I would say that has been such a big takeaway of mine.
No, I'd agree. And we see it mirrored with others as well. I mean, I mentioned Rachel Kotup, who's in the audience here today, former school teacher, now working with Michael Wilkinson and the team at ClickView. We've got Wolfgang Soldner, someone I met at the 2013 ADE event in Cork, at the Apple ADE Institute over there back in 2013, that one was. And, he's now working at i3 Technologies. He's working and sharing on the panel tomorrow as part of the conference as well. So the flip side is, it's also really lovely to see more and more EdTech companies not only engaging with educators, but actually bringing educators on board to help push the boundaries and push the envelope forwards to make things far more useful and relevant for education.
And I think that one of the things you could definitely do as a teacher is just if you just jump onto LinkedIn, and you could put in some of the things that you're interested in, you will be, whether you are thinking of kind of a career outside of teaching or not, I think it would just be really refreshing, and it will make you feel great about yourself, because you can type those skills in that you will all have as teachers, and I can guarantee that there'll be jobs there that you would be really amazed and probably quite excited about. Like, I could go and be a, like for example, there's a huge demand for educational content creation, like people where they have remote workforces wanting to have material that's going to be shared with their communities that isn't as dry as perhaps it once was. So yeah, just jump onto LinkedIn, type in a few of your skills. I'm sure there are many, and I'd love to hear the sort of opportunities and things that come your way.
Thank you so much for sharing your insights today, John. If you want to follow John on Twitter, he's at jneil. You can see his spelling for his surname there, _UK. But a firm favourite in my timeline, and I'm sure he will be on yours as well. Thank you so much for giving us some time to share today, John, both in your presentation and on the panel. Very much appreciate it, and hope we get to see each other soon.
I hope so too. Thank you ever so much for having me. Enjoy the rest of your conference. Cheers, Mark.
Thank you so much, John. Cheers. Okay, so just going to bring Ronan on stage now, ready to introduce our next speaker. Welcome back, Ronan. How are you doing there?
I'm good, Mark. Yeah, I'm not feeling much LinkedIn love today, but
no, no, not after how we started the day with all the spam and all the rest of it. But as John was alluding to, you know, these things happen, and Al and others, we learn from these things, and so we can do better in the future. So I'll hand over to you now to introduce our next speaker.
Yeah, thank you, Mark. Yeah, so I've been really looking forward to meeting Angelito. And Angelito, it is lovely to finally meet you. How are you? Your mic was on mute, but you're able to hopefully speak now. Hi, Angelito.
Okay. Hi, I'm great. Thanks for asking. It's finally great to finally meet you as well, virtually.
That's right. So, Angelita, I know you've quite a lot of experience. You probably can resonate with a lot of what John was speaking about there. You have you worked in the US and Philippines, and you now working in China?
Yes, I am. So I'm currently teaching technology classes here in Beijing, China, at an international school. Yeah.
Fab. Right. So, Angelita, I'm just going to show your card for a moment. This is Angelita's talk. He will start his presentation now shortly. So I'm going to hide, and Angelito, you can bring your presentation on,
Okay.
and I'll leave the stage.
Awesome. Before I start, I would like to dedicate this presentation in honor of my former middle school teacher, Mrs. Natividad Jovero. She was my middle school teacher who just passed away a few weeks ago. And she's very instrumental to where I am right now and to what I become. So I really owe it a lot to her. And I'm very, very grateful for what she did for me when I was still studying in middle school. So the title of my presentation is Filming Remotely to Promote Tech Ed Collaboration by yours truly, Angelito Balboa. But before I start, I would like to greet everyone a very nice day in the UK or in the Philippines. I think it's good evening, or here in Beijing, it's evening as well. So if the pandemic taught us anything, it is that even though we might physically separate, the technology can unite us. I remember it was in March 2020 of last year, I received a message that we could not go back to school. And that really troubled me a lot because most of my projects with my kids are in collaborative nature. And so it's very important for us to be physically together. But, with creativity and with passion for teaching, I came up with an idea on how we can solve this problem. And that is what I'm going to discuss with you today. So the goal of this session is to learn strategy and techniques to produce video projects in remote locations. And I hope that at the end of this presentation, you will have some ideas to be able to partner and collaborate with other schools. So how did it start? As I mentioned a while ago, last March 2020, we were told that the school would be switching to remote learning. But students were working on an assignment called the Hero's Journey Project, and all the students should be physically filming this together, but for some reason they could not do it. But the good thing about that is I already introduced the Chroma key technology to the kids. For those of you who do not know what Chroma key is, Chroma key technology allows you to replace video with backgrounds. It also allows you to combine footages or scenes. So this is used by Hollywood movie makers in the post-production. So they are just like replacing the green screen with a different background. So that's a concern. How are the students going to film if they could not leave their homes and everybody was on lockdown mode? So these are the steps that we have taken. So we planned everything. We carefully planned everything because it requires logistic-wise. It required a lot of planning, and then after that, they individually filmed because during that time, some of the students were still in the United States. Some of them could not even come back to Beijing yet. And then after that, they did collaborative video editing. They edited it using Premiere Pro or Final Cut Pro. So this is the planning stage. These are my students. So they chose their roles in this video project. So they scheduled the rehearsal for their parts. So they were planning on what they are going to do, which part are they going to come up with. And then they were given the chance to talk among themselves on how are they going to do their part. And they individually filmed in front of the green screen. So on top, you see the one of the students. He was in Beijing during that time, and then the girl in the bottom was in the United States. And so, but they were able to. So after they filmed this, they did the collaborative video editing. So each student was given the task to edit the videos using Chroma key while they were on Zoom.
Angelito, just one moment. Your slides aren't advancing. I'm wondering. I just want to check. Is it working fine on your end?
Yeah, it looks like it's working fine on my end. I'm already on the collaborative video editing slide.
Yeah, so we're currently seeing the dedication slide from the beginning.
Oh, okay, sorry. Hold on. So
we can see the collaborative video editing slide now.
Okay. So were you able to see the previous slides?
No.
Were you able to see the previous slides?
No, we weren't. Sorry, Angelito. I think maybe when you run it full screen, it's not moving forwards. So if you just click through the slides with inside PowerPoint like you are now, rather than running it full screen, that might work.
Okay, that will be fine. So how about that one?
Yeah, I can see the quote with the hands behind the if the pandemic taught us anything.
Yeah. So does that look better now?
Yeah, much better. Thank you very much.
Hello?
Yeah, that's much better like that, Angelito. If you want to carry on like that, jump through to where you were in your presentation perhaps and carry on from there.
Hello? Yeah, can you hear me back?
Yep, just about. Thank you. Yeah, if you want to crack on from there, that'd be fantastic, Angelito.
Okay, so can you see the slide now here?
I can see a slide that says at the end of this session.
Yeah, so I do not know if I was able to if when I mentioned this, it went through, or should I just go back again?
If I was you, given the time, what I would do is we obviously could hear your explanations around chroma keying and so forth and so on. I would move to where you were last speaking and carry on from there.
Okay, sure. So
thanks.
Okay, so these are the steps that we have taken. We planned everything first, logistic wise, who is going to do the part, etc. And then so every student was given a specific role on what they are going to do. So they were given the chance to speak on a breakout room. And then after that, they individually filmed in front of the green screen. And then after they filmed everything, they share these video files, or they save these video files on an online storage where everybody can access it. And then they did a collaborative video editing using Premiere Pro and Final Cut Pro. Now, I would like to share the excerpt from the final project of the kids. Mark, can you hear me?
Yeah, we can hear you.
Is everything audible?
I can hear you fine. I can see a slide that says excerpt from the final project.
Okay, so I would like to show this is an excerpt from the final project of the kids. There were some limitations, so this is the best that they got. But I'm sure over time this can be improved. And here is the excerpt from the video project.
This is my child, and I'll call him Sim.
Dad, can I play with Nala? I already turned in all my homework on PSL, although it took me forever.
Yes, my child, go and play.
Thank you, sir.
Simba and Nala are playing together.
Nala, have you heard about the elephant graveyard?
Yeah, I know that salmon sells cheap. You can buy 4 workers for only 1 kwai, but however, the elephant graveyard is too dangerous.
I think I'm already brave enough to go there.
No way, Simba, you can even beat me.
Okay, so that's the excerpt from the final project that they did. Please take note that these students were physically separated from one another. They filmed their parts individually. So here are some of the tips that I would like to share with you if you are planning to do this. So the students need to practice their lines first. Make sure that the green fabric or cloth is flat on a surface wall, because sometimes it creates it's a little bit challenging to edit it if it's not flat on the wall. Lighting is also very important, so choose a room that is well lit. So where do we go from here? Everything seems to be going back to normal nowadays. And so what's the point of doing this? So I was hoping that educators and students can expand collaborative video projects by partnering with other schools locally or internationally. And the goal is to broaden students' views about their societies and other cultures. Students will improve their technology literacy, and the learning will likely increase student engagement. In fact, I was talking to one of my colleagues, former colleagues. She's now in Poland. And we were talking about coming up with a project similar to this one, wherein we are going to come up with a video project wherein her students and our students here in Beijing, China, will come up with a video project using green screen. And so we are going to make it look like that we are filming in the same location or in the same scene. So if you plan to do a similar activity or project like this, please do reach out and collaborate. My email address is here, abalboa@this.edu.cn, afbalboa@yahoo.com, and my Twitter is @teacherb5. Thank you very much for paying attention and for listening. And yeah, just reach out if you want to do a collaborative project with me.
Angelito, thank you very much for taking the time to do this. And obviously, you're presenting in the evening. So I really appreciate you taking the time, and great to finally meet you. For our audience, Angelito has been incredibly generous with his time when we sort of ask him about if he has any ideas for articles. He's always very keen to contribute and join. So thank you for that positivity and for sharing that information. And also, hopefully, some people will get in touch with you to engage in some collaborative projects. So thank you very much, Angelito.
You bet.
Okay, so Mark, if you don't mind, I'll just drop you in beside me, because I think we're ready to wrap up day one, and obviously it's been a busy day. We've gone for this format of quite rapid fire presentations to hopefully make it as engaging for you as possible as an audience. We've covered quite a lot of different topics and also brought in speakers from lots of different countries, which is really what, for Mark and myself, Global EdTech is all about. Mark, have you any final comments?
I'd want to say a massive thank you to everybody who's taken the time to get involved and present today, and for everyone who's chosen to attend as well. As you know, you and I will know better than most the panic that set in this morning when we found that not only the site had been spammed and running things through LinkedIn was not working as we would have liked, but thank you for bearing with us over the course of the day. And for us, like John was saying, if we've helped one person through the event today with some ideas or some opportunities to connect or whatever it is, then we feel like we've done a good job there. And obviously we've helped far more than that, which is always lovely. But I'm really excited about tomorrow's event. Without the opportunity yet to converse with Ronan, I suspect what we will do is completely sack off LinkedIn. So if you signed up to if you signed up to day 2 on LinkedIn, we won't be using that tomorrow. Please do check mine and Ronan and the Global EdTech Twitter channels, Twitter handles for details for onboarding for tomorrow. But it will essentially be another YouTube live stream. It's also being live streamed through my Twitter account as well. So there are 2 locations you can engage and join in. But YouTube, particularly for the chat feature, is probably the best place where I would go. So watch out for that. That'll be shared by us on our socials. And if you go to the Global EdTech YouTube channel, you'll find it there, and you'll be able to sign up with a notification for when we go live and things tomorrow morning as well. Tomorrow, if you haven't seen on the agenda, I'm really looking forward to hearing from the likes of Eleni Karitsis, award-winning Australian Educator of the Year, joining us. It'll be evening with her, like it was for Kobe. Morning for us. We're kicking off at 8:45 with a 9 o'clock start, with Eleni opening the debates and the presentations first up. Then we've got Dr. Neelam Parmar, former UK-based educator, now working and sharing perspectives from her work now in Hong Kong. Then we've got Ollie Lewis, head of science and senior leader from a school in the Middle East, sharing EdTech perspectives from the Middle East. Then we've got Neeru Mittal talking about XR in education. Then Gunjam Tomar and Vanita Garg talking about SCL, social emotional learning. Mohammed Abu Hassan talking about GBL, game-based learning. And then we've got another panel discussion. Al Kingsley's back. We've got Ollie on from the UAE and Wolfgang Soldner joining us from i3 Technologies. Then Sophie Bailey, former content producer for the BET events for many years, and now running the exceedingly popular and really high quality EdTech podcast, is joining us for a Q&A there. Then Luc Piaton is joining us for perspectives from the French Guinea. Then we've got Lynn Thomas from the US talking about learner variability, and then some guy called Mark Anderson is talking a bit at the end, because obviously talking today wasn't enough for me. So listen, thank you so much for taking the time to join us today. We really appreciate it. Final words, Ronan?
Yeah, no, thank you for taking time out of your busy days and schedule to join us, and hope to see you tomorrow.
Brilliant stuff. Thank you very much indeed, everybody. Take care.